Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1238 of the War News stream. And we got massive news today and yesterday as well. The U.S. officials have threatened Russia with those crippling sanctions, and also they're sending a massive $10 billion Ukraine weapons package. Also, Syria is erupting into widespread chaos amid attacks, and there's been massive explosions reported across Iran yesterday and last night, and we have a ton of news to cover. It's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 48 hours of news from around the world, as we have been able to hear that the United States of America has threatened the Russian Federation with an official ultimatum: end the war in 50 days or suffer crippling sanctions and U.S. military support in the support of the state of Ukraine in the current conflict that the Russian Federation has been pushing forward for 1,238 days. The Russian Federation has already responded to this ultimatum in a flat-out refusal by statements from Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov earlier today, making statements not only disparaging the President of the United States, but disparaging the country as a whole. We have already been able to hear that the Russian Federation has been publicly supported by the President of the Chinese Communist Party and the Premier of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, who has also clearly stated that the People's Republic of China stands behind the Russian Federation in the current conflict, potentially bolstering and further supporting the Russian position to continue on the conflict, with a further view of Chinese aid being sent to the Russian Federation to help them to continue the conflict. Outside of that, we have also been able to see that the Chinese have been flexing their military muscles in an attempt to intimidate or threaten Western countries through military exercises that were conducted today in the Northern Theater Command by the 76th Combined Arms Army, showcasing new military technologies that are being implemented in the People's Liberation Army in small form at the moment. We have also been able to hear outside of that in the Middle East that the Syrian Interim government is now embroiled in a brand new civil war and conflict, as Syrian Interim government forces are now fighting Druze rebels, which have declared open rebellion against the government, and at this very moment in time, firefights have broken out throughout the entirety of southwestern Syria. Syria. The Israeli Air Force has been in operation in support of Druze rebellion over the course of the entirety of the day, and we have been able to hear that this is once again furthering the rift between the State of Israel and the Syrian Interim government's attempt to bring the Druze rebels to heel and under Syrian Interim government control. This is also coming at the same time as the Syrian Interim government has been engaging in battle against the Kurdish forces of the Syrian Democratic Forces within the northeastern region of the country simultaneously. Meanwhile, major explosions over the past 48 hours have broken out in a multitude of major Iranian cities, including Tabriz, Tehran, and Mashhad. We've also been able to hear that unidentified drones and forces have attacked and destroyed oil infrastructure throughout Iraq, including U.S.-owned oil fields towards the area of northwestern Iraq near to the Kurdish lands. We have also been able to hear, on top of that the Russian Federation is continuing their support to the Islamic Republic of Iran, with another Russian flight taking off from Tehran and flying back into Russia earlier today, most likely to pick up more support and to continue to supply the Iranians with a drip feed of some form of military support over the coming weeks. We've also been able to hear that the Russian Federation has seen a significant explosion inside the city of Izhevsk, which is not only responsible for the production of Kalashnikovs, but also the production of other significant weapon systems used in the conflict by the Russians in Ukraine. We have also been able to see the Ukrainian armed forces have held the Russian Federation back while striking targets in Voronezh and Yelets in the Lipetsk Oblast and inflicting heavy losses today against the Russian Federation's armed forces. We have a significant amount of news over the past 48 hours. And once again, it is quite true that at least over the course of just 2 days, you would see the developments of weeks in decades prior due to the intensity and the amount of news and the rapidity that it's coming out in at the moment. But we are going to be making sure to cover each and every single bit of all of this major news that we have so far tonight. And moving on into the major news of the night, we have been able to hear that the United States of America has issued an official ultimatum to the Russian Federation, the first of its kind ever that's already being backed up through direct military support. The United States of America has pledged $10 billion in direct military aid to the state of Ukraine to support their operations. Included in that is 17 Patriot battery air defense systems, and as well as a large amount of Patriot air interceptors and many other weapon systems which have not been disclosed directly to the public yet, but totaling $10 billion just about in actual raw military support. We've already been able to hear that this equipment is ready to be shipped into Ukraine at any moment, and from out of Europe into Ukraine directly at any given moment as well. The amount of details involved in the shipment of these pieces of equipment or their exact locations is not known, but the message is being sent quite clearly at this point by multiple American news agencies and the U.S. government that at any given moment, U.S. support will start to flow into Ukraine, and this time it does not appear, at least in the short term of the 50-day period we're looking at, it's going to be a trickle. It may appear to be an actual veritable flood of military equipment and arms by the United States of America into the state of Ukraine. Outside of that, we've also been able to hear that the President of the United States has clarified prior statements which were misconstrued by others, as the U.S. President did say that on Tuesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky should not target Moscow with any American weaponry that is provided to the state of Ukraine. While that statement has also been made, there has been the consideration, at least floated around, according to sources close to the President of the United States, that Tomahawk cruise missiles may be provided in the future after the 50-day deadline to the state of Ukraine. Tomahawk cruise missiles are some of the most advanced missiles, and some of the oldest, mind you all, that have been in service. The Tomahawk is nearly 50 years old at this point, and has been in service since 1983. These cruise missiles, however, have an exorbitantly long range, capable of reaching ranges of about 1,200 to 1,500 miles in their normal flights, and normal variants of the Tomahawk cruise missile. These missiles are also capable of carrying a 1,000 to 1,500 pound warhead on board as well, depending on the variant, meaning that they can cause significant damage wherever they strike. Such an example could have been seen at the Isfahan Nuclear Research Campus to the southern region of the city, which was hit quite heavily by only a small handful of Tomahawk cruise missiles fired by a U.S. nuclear-powered submarine off of the coast, which caused significant damage to the Research and Technology Center in Isfahan that was critical to the development and use of nuclear technology by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Such missiles may possibly be provided to the state of Ukraine in the future after the 50-day deadline has ended, and it already appears quite clear that Tomahawk cruise missiles may well be within Ukraine's distant future, or really near future at this point, as the Russian Federation has already made claims and comments that are largely showing that the 50-day ultimatum will not be accepted even outright within its first opening hours. The foreign minister of the Russian Federation, speaking on the behalf of the president of the Russian Federation today, has rejected the president of the United States ultimatum outright and is currently preparing for a new offensive somewhere within the territory. We have also been able to hear that Vladimir Putin dismissed the president's 50-day ultimatum and tariff threats, signaling Russia's intent to escalate the war in Ukraine rather than back down. According to Kremlin-linked sources cited by Reuters, the article that most everyone's getting their information from today, Putin is unfazed by sanctions, which is, at least publicly he's unfazed by sanctions, but we know the reality is that the Russian economy and the government is being heavily fazed by the current sanction regimen in place. Any stricter sanctions would start to cause extreme tumult throughout most of Russia, and determined to fight until the West accepts his terms, including recognition of occupied territories and limits on Ukraine's military, meaning cutting the Ukrainian military down to size. With Russian forces already controlling 20% of Ukraine, his ambitions may grow further as the front line advances, if it does. One source warned of a major new offensive in the upcoming months, which, according to the locations that were listed, this offensive could happen literally anywhere except for Zaporizhia and Kherson, considering that there's already an ongoing offensive in Zaporizhia. Putin has also demanded a halt on NATO expansion eastwards and that the West legally recognize his gains. At least according to the source, he believes no one has seriously talked peace, so he'll keep going until he gets what he wants, clearly showing that at least at this point, the Russian Federation is not pursuing an actual path of peace and is once again well on the path of war, and not only a war with the state of Ukraine, but still eyeing their further westward ambitions throughout the Baltics and parts of Poland, which has been stated multiple times by the president of the Russian Federation and has also been stated multiple times by leading voices in the Russian Federation, which voice Putin's general belief system and ideology to the Russian public. Another thing that's also become fairly clear at the moment is that the Russian Federation will not be alone for long, at least for now, in their fight against the state of Ukraine and largely against the United States and Western interests inside of Eastern Europe, as the well-known ally that's not official but largely official has actually come out today and made statements clearly in support of the Russian Federation. And everyone knows that that would be the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China is largely America's biggest threat economically and militarily that exists currently on the face of the globe. The People's Republic of China has a population of approximately 1.4 billion people. It also has a significant military budget, the second largest in the world, at 330 billion US dollars annually, still only a third the size of the US military's annual budget. They also have one of the largest armed forces in the world, with about 1.4 million active personnel. We also understand that the People's Republic of China has a nominal GDP of around $17.5 trillion. The People's Republic of China is a formidable force to be reckoned with, at least in terms of its size, scale, and military abilities compared to our other adversaries around the world. And this makes the People's Republic of China largely the leader of the anti-American or anti-Western sphere of influence that is currently being seen in the modern day, including that of the Russian Federation, with the Russian Federation largely serving as a minor power or player within that sphere of influence that the People's Republic of China largely has hold or control over at the moment. We have been able to hear that earlier today it's been made clear by the Chinese government that they are strengthening their ties with the Russian Federation following the United States tariff threats, according to the Telegraph. According to statements by Foreign Minister Lavrov of the Russian Federation, aka the Horseface has stated that Xi Jinping, or Winnie the Pooh, also stated that he needed that the need to strengthen mutual support and emphasize that trust between Beijing and Moscow has deepened. This statement came after the president threatened to impose 100% tariffs on goods from countries trading with Russia, including China, if Putin does not agree to peace within 50 days. It's becoming incredibly clear at this point that the People's Republic of China is showing its true colors by continuing to push forward this concept or largely idea that they will not accept the United States or the Western world at large seeing any benefit or gain of territory control, influence, or economic power in the current century without them actively resisting it or supporting countries that are actively resisting our sphere of influence and our best interests. This is largely making it quite clear at this point that the United States of America and the greater Western world is entering a second Cold War, at least from what I can tell, where the People's Republic of China is now the main leader of what we could call the authoritarian bloc. I would not really call it a communist bloc, more so an authoritarian bloc, against the United States Western-led democratic bloc, which is continuing to support our interests and protect our allies around the globe, including the state of Ukraine, the state of Israel, our Middle Eastern interests, and also all of the East Asian interests that we have, including the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan. Nevertheless, we've also been able to see on top of that the United States of America's statements, at least with their provisions of $10 billion in aid to the state of Ukraine here within the inevitable future, might be effective. And a lot of people are actually talking about that at the moment, and the kind of precedent that this is starting to lay out, at least for the next 50 days, until the ultimatum deadline is reached for the Russian Federation to either gain a peace in the region of Ukraine, or to face crippling sanctions and crippling military support by the United States in support of the Ukrainians. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about this as well?
All right. So the poll says the U.S. will sell about $10 billion in weapons to NATO countries to provide to Ukraine. And the question is, will it be effective? And 55% said yes, it will be very effective, while 28% said it seems like a good start, and 10% said no, it will be a disappointment. And this is a huge package. Obviously, this is massive. This is a lot larger than I was even expecting. $10 billion, that is no small amount. But the only caveat is the U.S. is not giving $10 billion in free weapons. These weapons will be paid for by European NATO countries, and that's how it will be funded. These European countries will buy the weapons from the United States in the amount of $10 billion for the sole purpose of providing them to Ukraine. So that's the way it's really working. It's really honestly more like Europe's providing it and the U.S. is manufacturing it. But nonetheless, though, so the end result is Ukraine's getting more weapons. It's going to include Patriots. It's going to include artillery shells and also short-range missiles as well. And also maybe some extra missiles that we're not really being told about in the public as well. So I'm with the 55%. I think it'll be very effective. And this is a long time coming. And I'm certain that Putin will respond to this very strongly, because this is a big move by the United States. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that it's a massive move by the United States of America. I also have to throw out that caveat as well, that it is not being provided directly through U.S. Congressional drawdowns or acts that allow for presidential drawdown authority for specific funds allocated to Ukraine. This is entirely being provided largely on the European taxpayers' dollar, with the United States providing the arms and the weaponry to the state of Ukraine in the end. That means that the United States isn't directly funding these weapons. It's more so that we are just allowing for the Europeans to fund the weapons, and we are going to produce them in bulk. Pretty much the Costco guys' answer to providing the state of Ukraine with weapons. But nevertheless, it does appear that this will most likely be incredibly effective, as the European Union is no longer relegated or tied down to the limitations of their current arms industry. They are also able to tap into the U.S. arms industry, which is rapidly expanding, or is planned to rapidly expand here within the near future, to be able to provide a large amount of weaponry to the state of Ukraine, and not only that, from existing Department of Defense stockpiles as well, which are also incredibly voluminous, and a lot of that equipment is soon to be retired due to it reaching its very near expiry date for the large part, meaning that most weapon systems are going to be beyond their usable age, and most of them will be subject to a great deal of faults or errors beyond that age point. Nevertheless, I do believe that.
Well, the interesting part in force is actually a good bit of the equipment being sent, believe it or not, a decent portion of it is allegedly coming straight off the production lines of some of our top manufacturers in the United States. That's what I'm hearing in the articles. And it's also presumably some newer equipment might be sent along with some of the older equipment that's going to be retired as well. So it doesn't sound like we're going to use Ukraine as a dumping ground this time, well, thankfully and hopefully not. And it sounds like we'll send them at least some up-to-date equipment that's not super used and super worn down, at least from what I'm hearing.
That I've heard as well, but at the same time, I've also heard that there's a lot of equipment that the Ukrainians need right now, like smart guided rounds, which could also be provided from U.S. Department of Defense stockpiles throughout the country as well, to immediately fill that gap instead of having to wait for some of these industries, like shell manufacturers, to be able to keep up, will grow to meet the demand that the Ukrainians currently have or that the Europeans are buying, at least at the moment. That I've also heard, but it does appear that most of it will be provided from actual purchases of new equipment that is coming off of the assembly lines. Beyond that, though, it will be incredibly effective. Also, by the way, Matthew, you might want to see about fixing a thing or two on your end because Robomat's kind of reappearing, or really long pauses. Like when you start talking, like you'll say something and then there's like a 10-second delay and then you start speaking. So I might want to look into that a little bit. But beyond that, it does appear that at the moment this will be effective in supporting the state of Ukraine and providing them with arms or materials. Outside of the internal politics in NATO at the moment about how this material is being provided, it most likely will do a great deal of good for the state of Ukraine, especially when we talk about the air defense roles and the artillery roles that we are currently hearing at the moment are the most important for the state of Ukraine, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. The Ukrainians and the Russians at this point are largely tied up into a stalemate, meaning that neither side is able to create any sort of a strategic breakthrough on the front lines through heavy fighting and to be able to gain a massive swath of ground, either for the Russians or for the Ukrainians. At this point in time in the conflict, what's the most important is to be able to strike at the enemy nation's abilities to wage war, whether that be the petroleum industry, which is Russia's monolithic economic structure, or if it was something along the lines of the Russian Federation's military factories as well, which also produce a great deal of arms and equipment to continue to keep the Russian armed forces fighting. Those are generally the main targets to be hit, and those are also the same targets that the Russian Federation is attempting to hit inside of Ukraine. For this reason, both sides have to heavily invest and build up air defense forces to be able to protect their skies from these incoming threats, as protection against these threats largely guarantees protection against the main aspect of the war that could end up dooming one side or the other. With the United States stating that they are going to be providing 17 new Patriot air defense batteries to the state of Ukraine, this will actually allow them to not only have enough Patriot air defense systems in operation, but enough in surplus that if any unit was damaged or taken out of action for repairs or maintenance, another unit could take its place and fill its role on the battlefield at that point. That is an incredibly important thing for the state of Ukraine, but what will be more important is the continued provision of Patriot missile interceptors, as the interceptors are as important, if not more important, for the functioning and continuous operation of Patriot air defense batteries. What's more important is that if the Ukrainians are able to be provided the subsequent amount of artillery shells that would be necessary for the Ukrainians to be able to reach near firepower parity with the Russian Federation's artillery on the front lines, as artillery, while still playing a equally important role to drone warfare at this point in the conflict, is also the major determinant of most conflicts, at least at this point, throughout the modern warfighting age. It was actually Napoleon Bonaparte himself that said artillery is the gods of war, and even still to this day, that largely remains true. Artillery is an incredibly important determinant on how a force is able to fight. If you have enough artillery shells to reach firepower parity with the Russians, it's not only the case that they are suppressing your forces, but you are also suppressing their forces to great effect as well, making it practically impossible for them to be able to conduct successful offensives, although that's pretty much impossible at this point, and to also be able to conduct successful offensives, as you'll be able to overwhelm them with superiority of firepower doctrine alone. This means that the Russians would pretty much be blindsided by the amount of incoming fire, be suppressed or fixed in place due to the incoming artillery fire, and the Ukrainians could advance and pick off these units at will and allow them to create significant breakthroughs. Such superiority of firepower doctrines were heavily emphasized at the beginning of the war in Ukraine in the latter point of 2022, where we were able to see that the Ukrainians conducted the Balaklia offensive and the Kherson offensive with superiority of firepower, at least in the artillery, being possible, actually able, at least at that point, to nearly reach the same amount of shells fired per month that the Russians were also firing per month. This meant that the Ukrainians could not only deal in counter battery and suppress the Russian guns, but they could also fix Russian forces in place with heavy artillery fire and then advance across the open fields to be able to engage them in combat, destroy them, and then move forward. That was the main reason why Ukrainian forces were successful, and if the Ukrainian Ukrainians are able to take care of the artillery and the air defense inside of their country, victory may actually be on the horizon on a strategic level. Not under the current conditions, but if things continue to improve, at least in terms of foreign support to the Ukrainians, it is entirely possible that we may see that the battlefield situation is reversed and that the Ukrainians can actually start to make significant gains against the Russian Federation or inflict untold casualties that have not been seen at this point inside of the conflict. So I will have to say that I'd be with a large majority. This is going to turn out to be incredibly well for the state of Ukraine in their fight against the Russian Federation, and largely for American and Western interests.
And honestly, as well, I'm not sure if we're still having lag or not, but honestly, as well, the $10 billion package is so much larger than I was expecting. Like, I was expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of like maybe up to $1 billion that we're going to send. And once again, we're still just manufacturing the weapon. So it's not like we're giving Ukraine $10 billion. That's not really the way it works in reality. It's just simply giving them permission to get the $10 billion worth of weapons from these NATO countries to go to Ukraine. But still, that's massive. Because before, Ukraine was begging for just Patriots. Like, they couldn't even get Patriot missiles to restock their missile systems. That's how like dire it was before. But now they're able to get 17 launchers, which is insane. And there's some speculation about, is it going to be entire Patriot systems? From what I can tell, though, it looks like it will be entire Patriot systems. So 17 is quite a few. I'm not really sure how many total Patriot systems there are. I think it's something like maybe 100. I'm not really sure. But that's a lot of systems going to just Ukraine.
Let me pull that up really quickly. How many Patriot systems are in the world? Also, really quickly, everyone, I do have to make this clear that it is Patriot batteries, not missiles. 17 Patriot missile interceptors is literally a non-measurable number and not even a bragging right. The statement made earlier today was 17 Patriot systems, not the missiles. So it is the Patriot batteries themselves that can fire the missiles. It's kind of like saying, you know, we're sending a battleship, and then everyone's asking, are we sending battleship shells or the battleship? We are sending the battleship. That's pretty much the same thing with the Patriot interceptor. But nevertheless, there are about 240 Patriot systems in the world currently. So this is actually a significant portion of the current and existing Patriot systems that exist in the world. We do understand that some of these Patriots may possibly be provided as used Patriot batteries that have been in service with the U.S. Army for several decades at this point, because the simple fact of the matter is that most Patriots are no longer being produced inside the United States, or Patriot assembly lines are starting to churn out lower numbers every year, as the United States is gearing up to replace most of our Patriot systems with the THAAD, which is the Terminal High, I believe it's the Terminal High Altitude Air Defense System. That's what the THAAD stands for. But nevertheless, the THAAD is generally set in line to replace most of our Patriot air defense systems, meaning that a lot of Western countries may be in line to purchase those Patriot systems as we replace the Patriots with the THAADs, at least here domestically. With that in mind, the United States may be open to provide some of those used Patriot systems to the state of Ukraine, much like we've done in the past, considering that a decent amount of them are set to be retired here incredibly soon, within the next following years, or really within just this next year alone. So that may also be a way that such a large volume of them will be provided at this point at short notice, is the retirement of current existing Patriot systems and air defense batteries as they get the new THAAD system. Outside of that, though, and moving on into East Asia, we have also been able to hear that the People's Republic of China did openly state that they are supporting the Russian Federation in their struggle or fight against the United States of America and greater Western interest, which is once again showing us that the People's Republic of China is an open adversary to the United States of America and our interests abroad. Not only that, they have been showing once again a greater volume of training videos of military innovations and technologies being introduced into their armed forces recently in an attempt to try and intimidate or scare the Western world and make it look like China is far beyond the curve, at least in technological developments. We actually got to see some training videos today that came from the Northern Theater Command that were published directly by the People's Liberation Army to show off the military prowess of the People's Republic of China's armed forces. We actually got a video of an undetermined combined, a combined arms brigade of a combined arms army, the 76th Combined Arms Army, in the Northern Theater Command inside of China. We do believe that the video was filmed filmed most likely somewhere around the Inner Mongolia or Outer Mongolia area of China, which would be about Inner Mongolia, correction, somewhere about up here, just south of Ulaanbaatar, and just north of the Zilangol League. These towns are very difficult for me to pronounce. The video was most likely filmed somewhere within this area, from what we're assuming, because this area does fall directly under the control and command of the Northern Theater Command, which pretty much controls all of China's provinces within Manchuria. We were able to see them showing off some of their new, I would say, we actually do not know the exact brigade that this infantry unit is from, but it is showing some form of infantry exercise, at least at this moment. And infantry is integrated at some level into every single brigade of the People's Liberation Army's combined arms armies in the combined arms brigade principle or doctrine. We do understand that depending on the brigade, there can be less infantry, with the light brigades having the highest amount of infantry battalions and heavy brigades having the least number of infantry battalions. So unfortunately, we do not know exactly what brigade or what battalion we are looking at this moment, but it is clear that this is a part of the 76th Combined Arms Army within the Northern Theater Command. First, in the beginning of the clip, we can see them spreading out into the exercise. We can then see two Chinese operators throw FPV drones and then immediately don the FPV goggles. We then see them flying the drones as the infantry continues to advance with absolutely no spacing whatsoever, and the Boston Dynamics ripoff dogs walking alongside them. It is not really clear what purpose the Boston Dynamics dogs serve in the exercise, at least at the moment. We can also see them launching more drones, and oddly enough, the drones don't have any explosives on board, and it doesn't necessarily look like they're designed to carry any explosives, I can't really tell you what the purpose of this drone is, because it hits the target, it shreds the target, but that was about it. We can see the Boston Dynamics ripoff dogs continuing to advance as the Chinese conduct a sort of a fire and maneuver advance where one fire team remains fixed in place, supposedly suppressing an enemy force, while the other fire team advances while under the cover of the other fire team, with the Boston Dynamics ripoff dogs continuing to advance steadfast through the fields with no weaponry on board them. We can also see here that the spacing is absolutely abysmal, at least in this exercise. There is about a 5-foot spacing in between each infantryman, which usually is considered to be very little to no spacing, at least in the modern day. One 155mm shell will wipe out this entire squad or fire team that we're seeing in the clip, and a single 120mm mortar round could also do about the same effect. For this reason, while the Chinese are trying to show off their military prowess, there are clearly some short-sighted, I guess you could say, shortfallings of the PLA's current infantry tactics on the battlefield, because the spacing is absolutely terrible. On top of that, we still do not know the actual purpose that the Boston Dynamics rip-off dogs are currently serving on the battlefield, as they appear to be equipped with no weaponry, and it appears that they are only equipped with optical systems that are viewing the battlefield from about 6 inches above the grass layer on the ground, meaning that the amount of reconnaissance that could be provided by the rip-off robo-dogs is incredibly small. But we can see them continuing to advance. Once again, here's a look at the robo-dogs. It looks like they actually have some sort of an assault rifle clipped onto the side, mounted upside down. So I have no clue how this thing actually works. Also, that won't really provide any real value, because you have to remember, these dogs are about maybe 1 foot above the grass with their highest camera system mounted, meaning that they have a shorter field of view than just about anyone else would. And on top of that, it's never really been answered in this clip who is actually operating the robo-dogs. Are these things AI operated, or are they operated by a real operator somewhere? And also, what happens when the assault rifle on board the robo-dog runs out of ammo? Does someone actually have to physically go up to the robo-dog and switch out the mag? How does the robo-dog communicate that it's run out of ammo? How does the robo-dog even know that it's run out of ammo? One thing that does appear to be somewhat helpful, however, at least on the robo-dog, is the fact that it appears that it may have an electronic warfare jammer on board, but that can easily be defeated by a fiber optic drone, meaning that this tactic that's being shown in this clip is a little bit sketch. We're not entirely sure if this would ever work at all. But that is the end of the clip, and we also got to see an additional clip showing off the 76 Combined Arms Army's use of a flamethrower. It's some sort of a advanced flamethrower that almost fires a thermobaric charge of a sort, as it does not operate conventionally. You'll see that here in the clip. But here is the video of the flamethrower training exercise that was conducted today, which is also a little bit interesting to note that the People's Republic of China's PLA or PLAA is still using flamethrowers, as most armed forces are not largely using flamethrowers of any type in modern warfare any longer. But here's the clip. So in this clip, we can see that it is a two-man teamed flamethrower. This is something that you actually do not normally see unless if the flamethrower has some sort of a high-pressure nozzle with a great deal of recoil. This one does, that is able to fire over a very significant range. Most flamethrowers in U.S. service had a fairly distant range and were able to reach out to about 60 yards, but the flamethrowers that we currently see in service here may be some sort of a thermobaric flamethrower that has an extended range beyond that, possibly even reaching out to 120 meters. As in this clip, we largely are able to observe that the flamethrower fires out what appears to be some sort of solid gunk or flammable gunk, similar to that of a standard Soviet thermobaric launcher that is still in service in some units in the Russian army, at the hill or the berm in front of them. But here's the clip showing us the flamethrower in action, just getting right back to it. First they set up, this takes, by the way, for them to set up in front of a target about 60 yards away, about 7 seconds, not including their transit to get into range of the target. So once again, at least in combat conditions, they would currently be under heavy fire at the moment, standing in the middle of a battlefield, attempting to set up and prop up this flamethrower for the launch that was soon to happen. One other thing I'd also like for y'all to notice is that this man's hands, the supporting crew member that's holding the flamethrower, is currently blocking the actual sight on the flamethrower. He is blocking the reticle on the front end reticle of the rifle, or more so, I guess you could call it a rifle if you want to call it that, or the flamethrower, meaning that this operator doesn't really have a good line of sight to see where his target is or the drop to the target. We now see him propping himself up. You can get an idea here that this thing's got a lot of kick the way they're setting it up. And it actually does have a lot of kick. And it actually does have a lot of kick. It does appear that this flamethrower might have a much more extended range than it did currently, as we weren't able to note any drop-off, at least from when it fired to when it hit the berm. And also, once again, note that it appears to be firing some sort of fiery chunks, almost like napalm or some form of a thermobaric, at the hill. Also, sorry, Mandy, I don't mean to, like, pause for, like, a minute every time you talk. It's just that it comes through in a very small snippet, and it's, like, it's very laggy. So I'm like, I don't know if he's saying more at this point or what. So I'm trying to see if you're saying more or not. But beyond that, it almost appears that this thing could fire much further than the burn, because once again, note that at least from the flamethrower off to the left side out of frame, it appears that there is almost no drop currently to the projectile, the napalm or the thermobaric, that is being thrown from the barrel. So this thing does have a much farther range than what we're seeing here on the clip, possibly about 120 yards or farther. But still, it does appear that at the moment, the People's Liberation Army is attempting to continuously show the military innovations and tactics that they are currently using to try and intimidate the greater Western world, at least at the moment. It is wildly clear from these clips that are largely not published onto Western media sources or for Western media sources to access, that the People's Republic of China is attempting to posture themselves or conduct what is called, at least within the People's Liberation Army's psychological warfare doctrine, what would be called low-level coercion. The People's Liberation Army largely has a concept that fighting the enemy is the best when you do not fight them at all. And so largely what they are doing is trying to present propaganda to try and demoralize Western forces, including citizens here in the United States, into thinking that the Chinese are well ahead of the U.S. armed forces, and that any Western country, including the United States, would have an incredibly tough time or would have no chance at all of facing the People's Liberation Army in combat. However, even the clips that they're showing right now are once again giving us a telltale sign that the People's Republic of China's armed forces are a little bit behind the curve, at least in their development or practice of their current modern tactics, which are most likely being developed under a new doctrinal form, different than the one that we understood they were operating under in 2020. So, with that in mind, we are most likely going to be seeing that if the People's Republic of China did get into a war, while a lot of their technology does look modern, it isn't really being implemented well, at least from what we are able to see in drills or training. And I know that a lot of people are saying that drills are one thing and combat is another, but it's incredibly important to understand that the way soldiers are trained is how they are going to actually function on the field in real life combat. Real life combat is incredibly scary. It is terrifying. And for that reason, everyone's going to fall back to something that they know. If they don't know anything, they're falling back to knowing nothing. If they know a little bit, they're going to be falling back to the little bit that they know. They're going to resort back to their training because that's the only thing in their minds psychologically that will help them to survive the battlefield. With that in mind, the way that this current training is being conducted, or at least this current drill is being displayed, the PLAA is exhibiting small spacing and formations, which would be which would be easy to target heavily with artillery and largely knock out entire assaults. And not only that, the Boston Dynamics ripoff dogs that we currently see operating in the field, when we look at them up close, appear to provide practically no real value beyond the first 30 rounds on board the assault rifle on the dog. Rather than that, they probably will not be used that heavily in combat. An infantryman will have to reload the dog, meaning that the infantryman will be exposed to fire as he will have to be crouched or semi-standing to be able to reload the magazine, considering that he would have to reload it from the top down at an awkward angle, meaning that this poses largely a liability to the infantryman beyond the first 30 rounds on board the dog. The dog seems to only be carrying an electronic warfare jammer, which is somewhat useful, but at the same time, not entirely effective, as we do know that fiber optic drones could easily be deployed to counter electronic warfare systems and largely still take on these infantry and knock them out, at least from what we're seeing at the moment. So generally, it does appear that the People's Liberation Army is going to be performing quite poorly in combat, and that's not even a look at how the People's Liberation Army Navy or the People's Liberation Army Air Force would also be operating in combat as well. Also, I do see many people saying don't give the Chinese any advice or tips. Do not worry, folks. The Chinese, even if they get good advice or tips, it would take them years to implement these sorts of improvements or developments. There's no way that they can rapidly develop in a realistic setting to any kind of tips or improvements that we're giving on the show, because currently these current rollouts at the moment that we're seeing that are being used in the 76th Combined Arms Army and others is incredibly expensive, and it's incredibly difficult to implement. Infantry have to be trained in an entirely new way of fighting, revolving around the dog and also the drone system. Trying to implement anything new will require months, if not years, of training to get familiarized with those kinds of new technological developments, meaning that they really can't develop or change their doctrine at this point. It's pretty much fixed in place for the next several years, and they might be able to change that within months, but they're only going to go through the significant effort and cost of changing their current doctrine and tactics on the battlefield once it is faced in combat and proven to be completely obsolete or a completely insane sort of a combat doctrinal practice. So that seems to be at the moment what we are currently seeing, or what we could generally get from this. But if this is how bad the PLAA is off, I'm incredibly interested to see how bad the PLAN and the PLAAF also are off, including the PLASSF and the PLARF, which are also significant parts of the Chinese, and also the PLANMC, which I forgot to mention as well, which are also significant parts of the People's Liberation Army as a whole. Nevertheless, we are going to be moving on out of the People's Republic of China. And also, really quickly, Matthew, have you been able to detect anything on the broadband?
So I've hooked in an Ethernet cable now. So if there's any issues happening, it's not on my end. I guarantee you that.
And so we will have to see one really quickly, Matthew. Let me just take this off screen and let me do this really quick. How is the call coming through now?
It sounds clear now.
Oh, well, what do you know? It may just be that I have to restart my computer at some point, which I guess I'll have to do after the show. But beyond that, it does appear that the People's Republic of China is attempting to move forward with that, and we're going to generally end that conclusion there. Sorry that I sound a little bit distracted, folks. We're trying to deal with some technical difficulties in the background a little bit, and I also have a tiny little headache. But moving on from that and on into the Middle East, we have also been able to see that while the People's Republic of China is continuing to support the Russian Federation and their anti-Western interests, another country within the region, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is also largely supported in their struggle against the United States and Western interests, is also suffering some little bits of issues and problems, at least at the current time. We have been able to hear of major explosions in the past 48 hours, pretty much ripping through most major cities in the Islamic Republic of Iran. All the way out in the Far East at Mashhad, we were able to hear of significant explosions breaking out near to the airport, which we could see in this clip right here. That's in that clip, but still another significant explosion that broke out in Mashhad. The exact cause is unknown. Outside of that, and in the area of Karaj, we also were able to hear of significant fires that broke out within this area as well, although this video was not loading earlier when I tried to play it, and it still isn't loading now. So we will have to move on beyond that one and on up into the city of Tabriz, where we have also been able to see air defense fires inside the city of Tabriz in this clip right here.
Such mysterious explosions happening in Iran. It makes you wonder what's happening. It's almost like there's still a war going on or something.
It really kind of does, actually. And then in another clip from Tabriz, we also were able to see that some sort of a gas leak broke out, or at least that's the claim today by the Iranians. But it doesn't really appear like a leak, it appears more like a fire. But that's the end of the clip right there, but still showing us all of these significant explosions that have been breaking out throughout the entirety of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it's leading a lot of people to wonder what is really going on at the moment inside the Islamic Republic of Iran, and why all these mysterious explosions keep occurring. But while we wait for all of y'all to answer that question, we are going to be moving on into the rest of the news that we've also been able to hear from the Republic of Iraq, where we've also been able to hear that drones have apparently hit a U.S. oil field earlier today within the Sarsang oil field in northwestern Iraq, which we were able to see the fire of right here. The video was a little splotchy, in kind of an odd way, a little bit odd to look at. But beyond that, still showing the fire that was breaking out within that area. Outside of that, we also were able to see a fire that broke out in southern Iraq as well, in the Maysan province, with its causes also being unknown as well.
احتراق المحطة الجنوبية على طريق الطيب.
ولم يتم السيطرة عليها لحد الآن.
إن شاء الله الدفاع المدني يسيطرون عليها.
With that, that's the end of the clip right there, but still showing the significant developments and fires that are happening inside of Iraq. At the moment, it's unknown, at least for now, what these explosions or attacks are coming from, but it generally is assumed that it is most likely an Iranian-backed proxy force inside of Iraq, most specifically the Al-Nujaba, which is an incredibly large militia currently funded and supported by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that is operating throughout most of the rural areas of Iraq. For this reason, it's generally assumed that these fires and attacks that are being conducted with drone forces on the oil fields in the northeastern region of Iraq, including the southern regions of Iraq, are most likely all being conducted by the Al-Nujaba currently. Although we are trying to see what's actually happening as a result of that. But still, we are waiting to see what most people are thinking about those explosions and fires in Iran. And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so even though the 12-day war is technically already over, we are seeing massive explosions in several different areas of Iran, and it makes you wonder what is happening there, because of course the war is supposed to be allegedly over for now, but it seems like a war is still raging inside of Iran, so a little bit confusing on that front. But it looks like about 52% said it seems like secret Israeli attacks, either air attacks or on-the-ground sabotage attacks by Israeli agents. Another 18% said it's civil unrest by Iranians, and another 18% said there's a coup attempt in progress. Now, to say there's a coup attempt, that's a little bit shaky because we have seen no evidence of an actual legitimate coup in progress. Now, of course, there's always some civil unrest in Iran because that's just the nature of the country. But I believe this probably is some type of secret Israeli attack, most likely with one of their fighter jets of some sort. That is my guess, because it looks like with these multiple different areas being attacked, it almost seems reminiscent of the attacks we saw at the beginning of the 12-day war. So I think maybe it's just very covert attacks by these forces. And the Israelis might not be even entering Iranian airspace when they launch these attacks. It's kind of hard to tell, but that's just my speculation. I'm on the 52%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that generally it does appear that it's most likely Mossad attacks that are still being conducted throughout the Islamic Republic of Iran. It does appear incredibly clear that none of these attacks are sporadic or accidental fires or explosions. It's incredibly clear that there's some sort of an external influence that's involved in creating these explosions and fires that we're currently seeing through the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is my belief that at the moment, the state of Israel, while largely stopping the actual armed physical conflict at the moment, is continuing on a shadow conflict of spies and sabotage for the large part throughout the entirety of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The continued attacks against high-level officials inside of the country, which has ended in the deaths of several, including significant explosions and fires, which are still breaking out on significant economic infrastructure of the Islamic Republic of Iran and military institutions, is showing us that this is some sort of a coordinated effort by an external power to continue to weaken the Islamic Republic of Iran, and between the last war and the most likely inevitable upcoming war, which will be happening at some point within this year or the next year. So in my belief, it most likely is the Mossad. The Israelis are probably working in the background continuously with their intelligence forces to attack and destroy anything of value inside of the Islamic Republic of Iran, so that when the next conflict starts, the Iranian economy was weakened to some degree further than it would have been, and also that some other top officials who were critical to the function of the Iranian government also went by the wayside before the next war actually does begin. So in my opinion, it does seem to be Israeli attacks. It's just that they're not being officially recognized by the Israelis or anyone else. And the Iranians also do not have the goal to claim that they are actually being attacked by an intelligence force that is pretty much running rampant throughout the entirety of the country, literally from its most easterly regions to its most westerly regions and everything in between. But still, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least from what we have at the moment. And we've also been able to hear of significant actions that have also been happening within the area of the Syrian Interim government, and specifically throughout southern Syria today, as major firefights and battles are now breaking out throughout that region as well. As many of you all may know, and I want to make sure that I show you all of this again to get you all a little bit of an idea of what's going on in Syria. This is the current state of Syria as it exists right now. As you can see, a large amount of the area is controlled in white, and this is what's called the Syrian Interim government, largely led by the HTS, a splinter cell or a evolution of Al-Qaeda, generally. The areas in green are controlled by Turkish occupation forces, although there are some small areas in white within that area that are still controlled by the Syrian Interim government. We also understand that the areas in yellow are controlled by none other than the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are American-backed and supported. The areas in green are the Syrian Free Army, and then most importantly, the one that will become important for tonight, this area here in light pink or purplish color, that is actually the Druze people, or largely what we could call the Druze Rebellion. The Druze Rebellion is something that actually started up right before the end of the Bashar al-Assad regime. As it became clear that Bashar al-Assad's regime was collapsing by the hour, the Druze people rose up against Bashar al-Assad and actually took the most or majority of southern Syria. As a matter of fact, even reaching into the city of Damascus itself and engaging in battle against the Syrian Arab army, the army of Bashar al-Assad, in the very outskirts of southern Damascus. Since then, we did see that after Jalani took charge, the Druze people did declare a ceasefire and largely treated the not the Bashar al-Assad regime, but the Syrian Interim government with a decent amount of belief that the future would be bright. But after some atrocities and crimes against humanity have been conducted by the Syrian Interim government, not only against the people of Syria, but against the Druze people as well, we have seen that the Druze people have risen up in arms against the Jalani government and are now wishing to see themselves under the control of an Israeli occupational force or under the control of a semi-autonomous or completely completely independent state within the area. Since then, tensions have started to rise, not only in between the Syrian Interim government and the Druze rebels, but also between the Syrian Interim government and that of the SDF, with clashes breaking out of the city of Deir ez-Zor on the Euphrates, and also some clashes breaking out intermittently throughout the entirety of southern Syria since the end of the Syrian civil war, and largely the possible beginnings of a second Syrian civil war. Today, these started to culminate into significant actions by the Israeli Air Force in support of the Druze rebels, or the Druze rebellion, in southern Syria. Israeli Air Force aircraft have been targeting and destroying any significant buildups of SIG army forces throughout the area, striking small UAZs, T-72s, and other military equipment that is currently being used by the Syrian Interim government. And we can see those strikes being conducted in this clip. And moving on from that clip, we also were able to hear later on in the day that the Syrian Interim government's forces at least claimed that they were going to be leaving the Druze-controlled area, or at least one specific commander made that claim. This claim was largely not supported later in the day, and it appears that it may have been some sort of a ruse to try and dispel attacks from the Druze rebels or from the Israeli Air Force.
انسحاب قوات وزارة الدفاع السوري، انسحاب الثقيل والخفيف بعد السيطرة على محافظة سويداء بالكامل بفضل الله عز وجل. الآن بدأت دخول قوات الأمن العام إلى محافظة سويداء لبسط السيطرة ولبسط الأمن والأمان بالمنطقة وسحب السلاح المنفلت داخل المنطقة. الآن كما تشاهدون انسحاب الأسلحة الثقيلة لوزارة الدفاع من محافظة السويداء، وتعلن قوات وزارة الدفاع عن انتهاء العملية العسكرية بفضل الله عز وجل. دحر العناصر الخارجة على القانون.
لا مكان للمجرمين والخارجين عن القانون.
لا مكان للمجرمين والخارجين عن القانون.
تكبير! الله أكبر! تكبير! الله أكبر!
After this, it became incredibly clear that the Syrian army was not leaving any Druze-controlled regions, as clashes started to break out not too long ago, and we continue to see, just hours before that, that more Syrian Interim government forces were continuing to move into the area. All of these guys dressed in black on these technicals, or, the Terry wagons, those are actually the Syrian Interim government's armed forces that were entering the As-Suwaida government region.
And that's a hell of a lot of guys showing up there, too. Look, they even got police cars showing up, too. That's kind of wild.
Also, was that guy hitting a Sieg Heil?
Hopefully not.
Bro, I didn't know, that's not a good look. It looks like that might actually be what it is. I can't tell, though, but...
Are those like modified like Bearcats or something? They look like SWAT vehicles here in America.
From what I generally know, these actually, it's some sort of a similar variant to a Bearcat. It may actually be a Bearcat, but these were actually used prior to the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime for domestic policing and riot control inside of places like Damascus.
Interesting. Yeah, they look very, very similar.
And we can see that the buildups just keep going. This is a large army group. I do not know how large this group is, but it is quite a significant one. That's the end of that clip.
They're making a pretty big mistake doing this right here. Very big mistake.
Yeah, they are. They're really making a huge mistake. We then also saw that some Druze people that are living within the occupied Golan Heights also ran across the border today into Syria to protest the treatment by the Syrian Interim government of the Druze people. They were later apprehended and turned back by Israeli authorities before they could actually get into any harm. Outside of that, we also were then able to see that firefights and larger battles began to break out throughout the entirety of the region, and the Israeli Air Force was continuing to target and destroy any Syrian Interim government forces that were found within the area. But later tonight, just a few hours ago, we were able to confirm that clashes are now breaking out between the Druze rebels and the Syrian Interim government's armed forces in the As-Suwaida government.
Oh, damn.
Oh, dang! in Syria, they call tracers party favors. There seems to be no lack of them. I don't know what it is. It seems as though when Bashar al-Assad was controlling the country back in the day, they said, "Your Excellency, what kind of bullets should the army buy?" And he said, "The Syrian Arab army will only buy the finest. Nothing but tracers. No armor-piercing rounds. No normal rounds for that matter. Just, normal lead or steel core. No, all tracers. All incendiary tipped tracers. It's ridiculous. I've never seen this many tracers anywhere else in the world. Not kidding. Like it's literally like, because if y'all don't know, usually it's 1 in every 5 rounds is a tracer. So every 5th round is a tracer. That's usually the running equation that exists in most of the world. In Syria, it seems like every round is a tracer, or every other round is a tracer. It's an insane number of them, and tracers are usually a little bit more expensive than your normal kind of a round. That incendiary tipped tracer, not that cheap, but as you can see here, plenty of them.
These party favors, these are ones that will party a favor.
Man, I'm telling you. Oh, they're even playing music. Bro, that's like real music that someone just started playing in the middle of the battle. They were like, it's not festive enough. Let's whip out a sick trap beat. It's like, bro, these, like, I don't know what it is with the folks here in southern Syria, but they party in an odd way. We also got to hear that a battle actually broke out in the municipal stadium in the Sawaida government, which I can actually show y'all down here in Sawaida. Really quickly, I have to find it. Where is the stadium? We'll be able to tell it because there will be a soccer pitch on it. That isn't it. It's going to be somewhere. Oh, here we are. Is this it? This has to be it. Has to be. This is actually it right here. This is where their soccer pitch is, or their football pitch for everyone who isn't from America. But this is where this battle actually broke out. You can actually see the smoke and fire rising from the area as the two forces are going right at it, literally in the middle of a soccer pitch. That's the end of that clip, and we also got to see another clip here. So,
Yes, the good old chaos.
Suffice it to say, the soccer pitch is, they're playing a sport, but it's a blood sport. It's not at all a normal football game. In a normal football game, you graze someone and they give you a yellow card. And this game, you graze someone with a bullet, they give you a green card. You're good to go. Keep going at it. So it does appear that at the moment, the entirety of the city of Sawaida and the Sawaida government is under intense battle at the moment. And we also were able to see that Druze reinforcements were also pouring into the city earlier today, a lot like the SIG forces were, to prepare for this battle.
يلا حيوم يلا حيوم العزوي يلا حيوم الربع يلا حيوم النشامة يلا حيوم ايوه الله وسويدة يا عمي سويدة يلا حيوم.
It could be homecoming or it could be the war front. Either one.
Man, they do homecoming parades completely different inside of Syria. I've never seen one like this in America before.
روح المشفى معنا المشفى معنا روح يلا حيوم يلا حيوم حيوم الظلم حيوم الظلم يلا حيوم هاي ربعنا يا عمي ها اسمع سويدة يلا حيوم والله يلا حيوم ربعي يلا حيوم ربعي.
People are continuing to see that the southern region of Syria is falling into a literal war zone at the moment. A lot of people are starting to talk that old talk. It's a classic in Syria, and it's a question that's on everyone's minds every day in Syria. Is this going to be a new civil war or not? And Matthew, what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so the question on the poll is a full-scale Syrian civil war imminent as battles with the Kurds and the Druze factions inside of Syria are escalating with the Syrian army? So it looks like 34% said yes, it will be a real civil war, while 25% said no, it will remain contained to certain areas, and 30% said it seems like a 50-50 chance. So it looks like people are pretty much all over the place on this poll. In my opinion, with the Kurd issue getting out of hand, of course, that has to do with Turkey and the Syrian army, and now we have the Druze situation getting out of hand between Israel and the Syrian army as well. It looks like it's heading toward a bad head, and it could be maybe a civil war rising up, or at least brewing and starting inside of Syria, because it's happening in two distinct regions of the country. And with it really rising up rapidly, and we're now seeing the Israelis start bombing inside of Syria, it looks like it has a potential to get out of control really quick. So I'm going to be with the 34%. It looks like it could evolve into a real civil war. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to be with the 34% as well. This looks like it could devolve into a real civil war again, pretty much with the same groups that were at war before at war again. Really, at the end of the war, it was the Syrian Free Army, the SDF, and then the Druze at the very end against the Bashar al-Assad regime. Now it's the SDF, the Druze, and the Syrian Free Army against the al-Jilani regime. So pretty much the exact same thing. It's just that the leader of the main, I guess you could say, enemy country or enemy faction in the country has changed. And that's about it. But it appears that it's pretty much going into Civil War 2.0 at this point, from what I can tell. And it's not going to be going all too well, at least for now, inside of the Syrian Interim government. But we also were able to hear that the Israelis were attacking Hezbollah forces throughout the, I think it's the Bekaa Valley near to Baalbek today as well, which we could see right here. This is just north of the city of Zahle, which this entire area is generally known to be a terrorist hotbed in the region.
Also, by the way, I'm not sure if you heard, but the U.S. government requested Israel to stop bombing inside of Syria because the Israelis were trying to protect the Druze people. So they went in and did some bombing. So the U.S. said, stop doing that at our request. And there was some confusion about whether or not Israel actually backed off and stopped bombing in Syria or not. Some sources claim they stopped. Some sources claim that, hell no, they're not stopping. They're going to keep supporting the Druze no matter what the U.S. says. But that's the story right now. So I'm not sure if that's actually true. I'm waiting for some more sources to report on it, but it sounds like the U.S. wants Israel to back off and sort of give the Syrian armies sort of some leeway.
I've heard that as well. Generally, the U.S. has a foreign policy at the moment where we're acting somewhat friendly towards the Syrian interim government, but I think it's quite clear at this point that while we may have given them a little bit of a wider breadth when they first started to exist, they're not really a country or a faction inside of Syria that we necessarily want to be friendly with. They conduct crimes against humanity on a daily basis. In fact, I would say it's more in the open and as bad or worse than the Bashar al-Assad government was in its final years inside the Syrian civil war. So I generally have to say that we shouldn't really be treating the Syrian interim government with any form of benevolence. They are clearly not a country that we would want to be aligned with here within the West, and it would be better to support the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Druze, and the Israelis in the current actions against the Syrian interim government, because they are clearly not going to be a friendly country to the West in the future. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. But with that, it is time for us to move on into the question segment, at least for a brief moment, and to get to chit-chat with a couple of y'all before we move on into the rest of our news, which is largely inside of Russia and Ukraine. So with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So I just want to say this. I have isolated the lag problem, and I can assure you it is not my MacBook. I can assure you all that for a fact. So a Mac hit rocks. It's for the win here. It is definitely a problem on the PC, without a doubt, because I've isolated every single possible problem it could be on my computer, and I've tested it. It is not on my end. So the way it works in our Discord call is it's a P2P connection. So the Enforcer is the host of the call, and it's coming from his computer. And for some reason, there's some Wi-Fi issues going on his end. So we'll have to troubleshoot that and get that fixed. But for now, please bear with us with the lag. But jumping right into our super chat questions, we do have our first one here, which goes to Deminoac, who puts in a very generous $150 donation. And thank you very much, Deminoac, for that support. We appreciate that very much. And he said, can we hire Mossad for Russia leaders?
And I'd have to say that I would generally say no. Like I would say that we shouldn't. I don't think that any intelligence agencies should be running a foreign country outside of their own. They're an intelligence agency. They should stick to their lane for the large part of being an intelligence agency. I wouldn't be a big fan of the Mossad running Russia, or any intelligence agency running a country, because that would be pretty concerning, to be entirely honest, if they did. But I do thank you for the massive support and helping this channel to keep on running. It's just that, I don't know, like the Mossad running Russia? I don't know about that one. Like, I generally think if any intelligence agency should run Russia, it ought to be the CIA, because that's our intelligence agency. So why not? But I do thank you for the incredibly massive support and helping this channel to keep on running. And really quickly, folks, I gotta say really quickly, I can't do anything about my end. See a lot of people bearing down on me here about just fixing whatever's wrong. I can't, because I got to throw up a whole bunch of stuff on my screen that's technical and gives away the system's information about my computer to try and fix anything. So I really can't do anything. So, that's just kind of is what it is so far. Can't really do much about it, because
let's do this. Let's do this real quick, Enforcer. Try this. I'm going to end the Discord call real quick. I'm going to invite you, or you join my Discord call, and let's change it that way. So that way I'm the host of the call, and see if that changes anything on the whole call.
Sure, go ahead. And we will see when he invites me back to a call here really quickly. Any minute now. We're just waiting for him to invite us back to the call. We're waiting, folks, because we're in the middle of a question segment, and hopefully we can get a call going here anytime soon now. It's going to be any minute. And there we go. And the call started, and we're in. All right, Matthew, I think that we're good to go and ready to roll. So with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. So our next one here goes to Uncle David, other nephew. Puts in a $100 donation, and thank you very much, Uncle David, for that $100 support. And we do appreciate that very much as well. And he said, my dogs enjoy sleeping to y'all every night, and thank you for the hard work, and please take one from the chat and LSA.
That actually made it worse, Matthew. But beyond that, I do thank you for the massive support, Uncle David, other nephew, and I got to thank you incredibly for enjoying this channel and helping it to keep on running. I got to thank you so much for enjoying our hard work and helping us to keep this channel rolling, because we keep this thing rolling day in and day out. And if it wasn't for folks like you who helped to make this channel possible and helped to keep on rolling, we wouldn't be able to make this channel a reality each and every day and be able to cover the news. And so we will make sure to take one from the chat in your honor. A huge thanks to you so much once again. And of course, long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die. And so with that, Matthew, what do we got for a live chat in honor of Uncle David, other nephew?
So our live chat question goes to David, who's not Uncle David, but it is just normal David. He said, we have the Hawk system, and can we send that to Ukraine as well, or would that not be helpful?
Yeah, we actually can send the Hawk system to Ukraine. The current Hawks that are inside of Ukraine have actually been fairly helpful so far in intercepting and shooting down ballistic missiles and cruise missiles fired by the Russians. But generally, we want to be able to send them a system that is the most advanced that we can without violating national security concerns or interests, at least at the moment. So I would generally say that we could. It's just that the Patriot would be a better system to provide, because the Patriot can actually deal with and shoot down Kinzhal and Zircon hypersonic missiles from what we've seen in the past. The Hawk air defense system, quite truly, even in its most advanced and upgraded form, does not have that ability. The missiles are too slow, and they're also not as maneuverable as the Patriot's missile interceptors. So generally, we wouldn't want to provide the Hawk for them to have the most high-end air defense, because that still would be leaving some gaps inside of Ukrainian air defense. But the Patriot is able to fix and fill pretty much all existing gaps in the Ukrainian air defense that are not filled by the ground-based gun defense systems, which are able to defend against most, if not all, incoming Shahed or Garan 2 types of drones. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And a huge thanks to you so much once again, Uncle David, other nephew, for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it running. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news.
All right, so this one goes to Deminoac, who puts in a 50 once again, and thank you very much, Deminoac, for the second support of the night. We do appreciate that very much. He said, I'm going to start this right. I think that was actually his first super chat, actually, right there.
Hey, and I got to thank you for the support, Diminoic, and thank you for starting it right. That actually was the first super chat of the night, and I got to thank you impressively for supporting this channel and helping it to keep running, because folks like you are the people who make this thing possible and help us to keep it rolling. You help us to make this thing ad-free and sponsor-free every single time that we come on air on stream, and if it wasn't for folks like you who are going out of your way to support this channel and help it to keep on rolling, we would not be able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep this thing rolling as our daily job, and to be able to do this literally every single day as a result. So a massive thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well, Diminoic. And with that, it is time for us to move on up into our news inside of Eastern Europe, and particularly the war in Ukraine. As we have been able to hear today that another flight has taken off from Tehran and has returned back to the Russian Federation. This appears to be a privately contracted flight using an IL-76 that took off from an area around Tehran and flew back into an indeterminate area in Russia. But it does appear quite clear at this point that the Russian Federation is keeping a slow trickle of military and arms support heading into the area as they continue to try and support the Islamic Republic of Iran's efforts against the West and American interest inside of the Middle East. Outside of that, in Izhevsk, we were also able to hear that something did explode near to the area of the Izhevsk or the Kalashnikov factory concern, which we can see right here.
Там деревья.
Бахнуло именно, что-то бахнуло. А что там, блин?
Not seeing that clip, but still showing that there was some sort of an explosion or fire that happened in Izhevsk. We are not able to confirm if that actually was from a drone attack or some other form of attack, but an explosion did in fact occur. Outside of that, we also were able to hear that the Energia plant in Yelets was hit for the third time in a row, which we were able to see in this clip right here.
Его еще даже не достроили, блядь. А возможно,
We
что
see
вот
them
эти
here
вот окна
showing the building.
выбивал из-за этого? Да. Пизда.
А возможно, что, слышь, кстати, не повыбивала ни хера.
Ну, почти, Ирин.
Окна просто открыты.
But that's the end of that clip, and still showing us the kind of damage that was caused by the Ukrainian attack. We also were able to confirm that the city of Voronezh was also hit as well, and it appears that a drone, a Ukrainian drone that may have been interfered with through electronic warfare measures, ended up diving into a residential building and slamming right into it. So far, we have not been able to hear of any killed, but 19 were injured, and several were seriously injured as a result of the hit. Well, you see them here pulling up to a red light, which will put them perfectly in frame for the upcoming hit. Actually, I'm just going to keep that on. Why not? And there was the hit.
Oh my.
A pretty significant one. A decent amount of Russian citizens were actually injured in this hit, but once again, we are largely believing that it may have been electronic warfare interference, as there is no publicly stated reason as to why the state of Ukraine would have attacked a residential building, and no comment has been made on that so far, really by either side. We've just seen the clip alone. Also, on top of that, we were also able to hear of significant flooding happening in Moscow in several city streets around the central area, or really within the third outer ring road of Moscow, which we could see in this clip right here. We also got to see in the next clip water actually flooding from the top of a parking garage and giving this Mercedes a nice wash. We also got to see in this last clip here more of the flooding inside of central Moscow. But those are all the clips of the flooding that we've gotten from Moscow recently, which is showing that the capital city is currently dealing with some pretty turbulent weather, much like the United States has been dealing with over the prior days. Outside of that, and inside of the state of Ukraine, we also were able to see that some corrupt officials, or officers more so, were arrested by the SBU. These officers actually are responsible for fabricating personnel lists and including several extra service members that actually were never in the unit. They were receiving the salaries of these soldiers and never distributing them, since the soldiers did not exist, and then transferring them into raw hard cash. It is believed at the moment that these officers were planning on escaping the country with the money, but now they are going to be facing up to 8 years in prison inside of Ukraine for the theft of the money that they were trying to conduct through the army. We also were able to hear inside of northern Ukraine that the air defense report appears to have been pretty good overnight, with 178 drones directly shot down through gun-based air defense activity, and another 66 taken down through electronic warfare actions as well. Outside of that, we also were able to hear within the area of Tekhino that the Ukrainians are continuing to hit Russian forces that are hiding in the large grain silo which dominates the skyline of the city of Tekhino. We can actually see one of these airstrikes knocking out the further northern side of the grain silo in this clip right here. And with that, that's the end of the clip right there. And moving on from that and on into our next clip further down the way and inside of our location unknowns, we also were able to see a modified Ukrainian BMP-1. This one's actually kind of neat. Honestly, BMP-1s are obsolete, but this one is actually kind of neat. With the forest camouflage wrap that they put on it, the chain protection below, and also the cage protection around the turret. A pretty interesting modification overall. Outside of that, we also got to see the 36 Marines in training as well through a couple of pictures published by the 36 Marines. The location was indeterminate, but still really cool pictures, and the pics do go hard. Outside of that, we also were able to see some strong weather inside of the Russian front lines earlier today, which was a pretty funny thing to watch.
Why is he climbing up that tree like Winnie the Pooh when he was trying to get the honey pot?
Winnie the Pooh, Winnie. Bro, he's just climbing up there. I think he's trying to get to the little optical system at the top. That's the end of that clip.
Dude sounds like a piglet.
Man, honestly, man, you know, he sounds like one of those psycho clowns. Like, it's like, bro, that guy's kind of crazy. But moving on from that, we also got to see the Russian casualty report for the day as well. And the casualty report was actually pretty decent. According to Miss Decent Keeper of the Records, 245 drones is the 8th highest daily loss, tied with the 12th of July of 2025. Tanks, APCs, and artillery are higher, and categories are all above the recent averages, which is incredibly good to hear. We also were able to hear that 1,230 Russian drones were wounded, 1,230 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 6 APCs, 122 supply trucks, 3 main battle tanks, 52 artillery systems, 245 drones, 2 MLRSs, and that was generally about it, but still very impressive losses nonetheless. Moving on into the front lines of Ukraine, we also were able to see in the Belgorod region that the Ukrainians were hitting and destroying Russian positions with hammers, which we could see in these clips right here. With that, we're going to be moving on from that clip and further on down the line into the area of Torske and Lyman, where we are also able to see the Ukrainian 63rd Mechanized Brigade targeting and destroying Russian tanks within the Kremena forest. And we can see them hitting the underside of the hull right there and blowing it out. Very impressive stuff and good to see. Moving on from that area and further down the line into the area of Konstantinivka, we also got to see the current situation on the front line. Russian forces have been able to make some advances since the 1st of November of 2024 in most directions, and it does appear that the Ukrainian counterattacks in Toretsk, while pushing the Russians back for some time, they have now been pushed back out of Toretsk and are now towards the area of Ivanopilia, which is just south of Konstantinivka. Generally, we do understand that the next major battle within this area is going to be the city of Konstantinivka, as it does appear the Russian Federation Armed Forces are continuing a slow and grueling advance towards the city and hoping to eventually cut off what was once the lifeline and major supply connection for both Toretsk, Chasiv Yar, and Pokrovsk as well in prior battles. Moving on from that and into the area just east of Pokrovsk, we also were able to see footage of a Ukrainian Special Intelligence Group of the 120th Reconnaissance Battalion at work. We see them laying down some fire. We hear the artillery also coming in the distance.
Давайте подавай. Сука, ты ж мой. Сука. Она сама может пустить. Шо?
You see him popping up and firing off a few more rounds. We can see them continuing to lay down fire into the tree line in the distance. We see them quietly shifting around here. We can see one of the fellow infantrymen firing, and it appears their cameraman is now joining in, firing into the woods as well.
Давай, я хуярю, ты кидаешь.
We now see them lobbing a grenade and continuing to fire in their direction as they wait for the grenade to go off. We now see him reloading the Bren.
Шо? Шо? Да все, это без толку.
And that's the end of the clip. It's still showing us generally one of the small firefights to happen around Pokrovsk today. Outside of that, we are also able to see Ukrainian forces continuing to target and hit Russian forces around the Pokrovsk area in the 68th Jaeger Brigade. And we can see them landing the drone right on top of a Russian armored personnel carrier. It appears to maybe be an MTLB inside of the shed. And we can see them landing it. We can also see a fire has started to break out inside of the storage shed, as it appears that the MTLB inside of the shed is now on fire. With that, that's the end of the clip right there, but still, it appears that the Ukrainians are attempting to inflict as much casualties as possible onto the Russians in that area. Outside of that, we also were able to see the 148th Air Assault Brigade destroying Russian mortar pits around the area of Velika Novosilka earlier today. And it appears that the artillery hit was incredibly accurate, targeting the facility, well, more so the pit directly, and destroying it once and for all. We can also see a Mista S, a 2S-19 inside of this dugout, which was also hit and destroyed by an FPV drone. We didn't see the Mista S getting hit a second time. And we can also see it getting hit a third time.
They get Mr. Bead. Getting that Mr. B.
Hey, yo, Mr. B. And we see some Russians running around down there, confirming their presence, as the artillery continues to rain down on them.
Also, by the way, I can tell you exactly why the lag's happening, by the way. Like, I've already got the answer for you that we can fix pretty quickly once we get off air.
Oh, yeah? What is it?
You are due some updates on your system.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. I'll have to try and do that. But in the meantime, really quickly, I see some people saying some things, and since we're watching this clip here, or generally we're about to be moving on to the next one, so I'll save that for now. But we are moving on to the next one down in Mariupol, where we were also able to see a Russian factory responsible for producing concrete bunkers in Mariupol, was also targeted and destroyed by Ukrainian drones earlier today.
That's a pretty strong fire right there. It looks pretty thick.
It's thick like a milkshake. But with that, that's the end of that clip right there. Still nice to see. Really quickly, I do want to address a couple of things that I've seen in the chat. One thing that I saw, and this is something that is a little bit interesting, is that some people were insisting that tracers are not different than normal bullets. And that's kind of true, but not really, because if a tracer was no different than a normal lead or steel core bullet, then it would not burn some kind of incendiary on it to show where it is in air. The difference between a normal bullet and that of a tracer is that a tracer has some sort of an incendiary wrapped around it or placed largely somewhere near to the nose of the bullet. When the bullet is fired, that incendiary burns, which is what creates the tracer, or largely what creates the visual visual identifier of a tracer round that shows you where the round's actually going. There is a difference in between them, and for that reason, the tracer does cost a little bit more than a normal round. That is just a fact of life. A normal bullet costs less than a tracer because you have to add an additional process and also additional material to a tracer round to turn it into a tracer. Tracers do cost more. I thank all of the armchair experts in here, but me personally, having shot a lot of guns and have also looked around at buying some tracers, because I believe it is in fact legal to buy tracers, at least from what I've seen, they are more expensive in the civilian market, and from what I can understand, they're also a little bit more expensive in the military market. That's why you generally don't see that every round is a tracer, and also that still wouldn't make a lot of sense even if you could make every round a tracer. Another thing that I've also seen some people saying is that suppressors actually wear out after a couple of rounds and are completely useless, or a couple of mags. Yes, suppressors do get extremely hot when firing them, but the internals of a suppressor are not weak. The baffles inside of a suppressor are incredibly heavy weight. They are made usually out of some sort of a heavier weight material, or a material that that can be subject to extreme heat. Some suppressors that I heard of actually have titanium baffles, others have steel. Me personally, I actually know of a lot of suppressors that have steel baffles. For that reason, they can get insanely hot without a suppressor wearing down or melting to the point that they're completely useless. And you can use them under normal combat conditions, and generally while they're incredibly hot and you shouldn't touch them, much like you shouldn't touch the barrel, the suppressor will generally, or the suppressor or the silencer, whichever you want to call them, generally will be fine. But I wanted to make sure to dispel that really quickly, because I saw a lot of people saying stuff that just is markedly untrue or is fudology, and I'm not really a big follower of fudology, which is the practice of being a fud. Like those are generally just commonly understood things that are true. I personally would know them because I own a good bit of firearms. I also shoot them a great deal, so these are just kind of things that you end up picking up and knowing on because you either shoot something like that or you end up learning about it from someone else who would know about it. So with that, I hope that addresses that well to some people who are out there saying those sorts of things, because it's like, I don't know where they're getting that information from. But outside of that, moving on up into Kyiv, it's time for us to get to the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1238 of the war. And interestingly enough, today is a special speech because it's actually the Ukrainian Statehood Day, which is pretty much their version of the 4th of July. So without further ado, here is the speech. Peach!
Speech!
Дорогі українці, дорогі українки, 15 липня ми відзначаємо важливий день – День нашої державності, День хрещення Київської Русі України. Цей день про зв'язок, про всі етапи нашого державотворення і те, що об'єднує десятки поколінь. Тих, хто жив на цій землі 1000 років тому, і тих, хто живе зараз. Міст крізь часи, який стоїть на 3 нерушимих опорах. Українці тут були, українці тут є, українці тут будуть. І завжди на цій землі перемагає життя. Беруть гору цінності та наш характер. Найкраще в наших людях, які, попри війну, сльози і біль, зберегли в собі людину. Бережуть один одного, а значить, бережуть свою державу. І доводять це тисячі наших доль, тисячі наших історій. Про пережити, про те, що на серці у кожного, ким би ти не був, воїн, вчитель, музикант, розробник дронів або президент. Це історії про наші дні, ночі і ранки. Про ніч, на нулі яку описує військовий. Тиснуть, лізуть звідусіль, стоїмо. І ви тримайтесь. Читаємо новини про обстріли мирних міст. Що сказати, це війна усіх нас. І дай Боже миру для нас всіх. І допис цей вночі в метро читає молода мама з донечкою на руках. І малеча так уважно роздивляється все навкруги, ніби хоче запам'ятати все. Розказати колись своїм діткам про ці ночі в метро, про цю вершину людського духу. Коли дідусь надуває матрац 3 онукам, бережно вкриває їх ковдрою і чує: діду, а мультик? Дістаючи планшет, каже: звісно, козаки, як же ж без мультика? А неподалік люди вмощуються поруч у спальних мішках на твердій підлозі, але з такою ж твердістю всередині, твердістю перемогти цю ніч. І протягом такої ночі на платформах, в паркінгах, в укриттях, в коридорах і ванах мерехтять телефони десятками сповіщень. Летить, працює ППО. Залишайтесь в укриттях. І ми залишаємось, аби залишитись українцями у своїй державі, на своїй землі, побачити, як сходить сонце, і попри все сказати один одному доброго ранку. І ми завжди маємо віру, що це станеться. Саме так, Саме так, протягом століть і на Русі, і на Січі, в усі епохи, який би ворог із якого би боку не приходив, ніщо вороже не приживається на цій землі і не пускає тут коріння. І Україна залишається собою. І ранок неодмінно настає. І хочеться ще поспати, але ти знаходиш сили і підіймаєшся. Пишеш своїм, радієш, коли все в порядку. Читаєш допис того самого воїна. Відбилися. Маємо пару годин перевести подих. А хтось пише, маємо кілька термінових потреб. Ти закидаєш на збір і виходиш на вулицю. У цей ранок, ідучи містом, своїм містом, ти бачиш довкола своїх. Бачиш обличчя людей і очі, в яких, попри все, є життя. Бачиш, як, попри все, відкриваються кафе. Як транспорт їде попри все. І розумієш, держава – це люди. Їхня сила, стійкість, щирість, їхнє світло. На зупинках, в заторах, в черзі за ранковою кавою, коли всі трішечки гальмують, бо спали кілька годин. Але кожен це знає і з таким розумінням і теплотою ставиться до тих, хто поруч, до українців і українок, які тримаються 1238 днів. І кожен такий день ми долаємо разом, спільно, справами, допомогою, підтримкою, підбадьорюючи один одного і, звісно, жартуючи один з одним. Іноді, бо без цього ніяк. І коли жіночки, комунальниці саджають квіти в сквері, ти чуєш, хай та русня вдавиться, а у нас літо, і у нас все має бути красиво. І кожна така ніч стійкості, кожен такий ранок єдності, коли життя все одно перемагає, показують, хто ми насправді. Ми часто чуємо від партнерів, як вашим людям це вдається. Така міцність, витримка, сталевість. Вони кажуть, це феномен українського народу. Так, це приємні слова, але сьогодні українці тримаються не заради цього, не для гучних епітетів на нашу адресу. Ми просто люди, які захищають дім, свій дім. І ми не можемо інакше, бо не хочемо інакше. Не хочемо, аби тут була Росія. От і вся правда. І все, що проходить Україна щодня, це не буденність, це велика справа, яку робите ви. Герої на фронті, хто тримає позиції, хто щоночі збиває ракети і шахеди, хто гасить вогонь, хто розбирає завали, і кожен громадянин, який тримається увесь цей непростий час. Я дякую вам, мільйонам українців, мільйонам характерів, з яких складається наша держава, наш народ, наша історія і шлях від хрещення Русі України до сьогоднішнього дня. Дня нашої державності і того досвіду кожного покоління, який допомагає нам сьогодні. Триматись, вірити в себе, вірити в Україну, вірити, що ми зможемо. Бо українці тут були, українці тут є, українці тут будуть. З Днем Державності, дорогі громадяни, з Днем хрещення Русі України. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Героям слава! And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1,238 of the news from around the world. And that's going to be moving us on into the second segment where we get to talk to each and every one of y'all. But before we get on into that segment, Matthew, I understand that we have another question that everyone's been asked. And what are they thinking about it? And what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so we got a big question on another very big topic right now. The U.S. has issued an ultimatum to Vladimir Putin, and here is the question in the poll. It says, the U.S. says Putin must cease fire in 50 days or less or face brutal sanctions, and is this better than nothing? About 42% said no, it's too long of a deadline, it's too far away, while 33% said and the U.S. will probably back out again of even this plan, and 12% said yes, it will stop Russia fast. And honestly, we're already seeing right now that apparently it's not stopping Russia whatsoever. We've seen really brutal attacks on the civilians today with a drone attack from Russia. And it looks like, if anything, it's causing Putin to ramp up his attacks on the civilians and also advance for the summer offensives on the front lines. So, in my personal opinion, the 50-day deadline, it's better than nothing because, of course, the U.S. could just not take any stance whatsoever and just be neutral and let Putin do whatever he wants indefinitely. But it's also too long away. If we're going to put a deadline on Russia, we should shorten that deadline by at least half or more, because in 50 days, Putin can kill an unlimited amount of civilians, which he's already doing right now, and the West should not allow that to happen. We should stop that in its tracks before it continues on, because why wait 50 days when we could wait 10 days and see the exact same result in just 10 days? It makes no sense to me unless we're just trying to stall again. So I'm with the 42%. It's way too long of a deadline. I say we should cut that down dramatically, or otherwise Ukraine's going to end up paying the price for it because Russia's going to take out their anger on the innocent civilians. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally have to be in favor of the 42%. I think it's too long of a deadline. I think it should have been only 3 weeks at a maximum, or maybe a month, around 30 days or so, because this is exorbitantly long. It's also giving a little bit of a chance that the Russian Federation could attempt to try and play another stupid diplomatic game and then stretch this out longer than 50 days, which I have a feeling that the chances of that are incredibly high, because neither the last administration or the current administration ever had the follow through or the willpower to be able to actually push forward with strong, incredibly strong actions due to a fear of the backlash from the public, because the public is generally a little bit too peace loving for their own good, to be entirely honest. So with that in mind, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion, because I do think that this is too long of a deadline, and it's once again giving some wiggle room where the United States could potentially back out or find some excuse to back out of further or significant support for the state of Ukraine. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can.
You know what the U.S. president could do right now to save face on this issue, because 50 days, in my opinion, is a joke. Like, to say 50 days, I'm not even really sure how they came up with that time frame. That's more than, and that's about actually 2 months in total is what 50 days is. So what he could do right now is tell Vladimir Putin that the 50 days is contingent on him stopping attacks immediately on the civilians. Now, of course, the war is going to go on the front lines. Like, there's no stopping that. They're going to keep fighting on the front. But these attacks on the civilians inside of Ukraine, that either has to stop immediately, or the 50 days ends right now when they keep attacking civilians and they immediately resort to sanctions that second. That should be the contingency in place to also supplement the 50-day timeline, because without that, there's nothing holding Vladimir Putin back at all. He's going to keep going hard on the civilians, and it's going to be a bloodbath, as he's already proving right now. So, I don't see any evidence of a contingency like that being put into place, and I don't think that's going to be entertained, but it should be. Like, logically, it should be entertained, at least in my opinion.
I would say that it should be entertained, but we'll largely have to wait and see at this point. But with that, I hope that does address that poll the best we can. And with that, it is time for us to get on into the question segment. I also saw someone spring loaded and said diplomacy is patience, but there's what's called patience, and then there's what's called stupidity. And at this point, we are treading a very fine line. I would say that we've actually largely crossed it from diplomacy into stupidity. The Russians have run circles around us for largely 6 months at this point on peace negotiations, and have pretended to be serious but also not be serious at the same time, and we can't sit here and be patient to the point that we are so patient we get steamrolled and we end up losing the war in Ukraine. That can't be the case. We've given them multiple chances and attempts to actually take talks sincerely and seriously, and largely their time's already run out. We can't be so patient to the point that we go, well, the Nazis are invading Poland, let's give them 2 years to reverse that track, and then once 2 years have passed, we'll see where they're at. Because if we did something like that, we would end up of course, largely losing out on being able to react when the time's appropriate. So I would agree that diplomacy does have a lot to do with patience, but I'd also argue that about the 6 months of the circles that have been run around us with the Russian Federation has been patience enough, and giving them a 50-day deadline is far too generous. And I think that it would more so be the case that a 30-day deadline or shorter would be more appropriate in the situation, or maybe even just a straight-up ultimatum that it stops in 2 weeks or 3 weeks' time, or else there will be serious consequences. That generally would be the approach that I would take. But with that, it is time for us to get on into the questions. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so jumping right into our super chats yet again, right back into our segment here. This first one goes to none other than Hokey Redneck, long-term channel legend, and thank you very much, Hokey, for that $50 support. He said, Enforcers, do you know who Oliver North was? And sadly, I don't know who that is, but we'll have to look him up and see exactly who that is. I'm looking him up right now on the side screen to see. Oh, let's see. I know who this guy is right here. I think he might be a political guy, actually. He might have some very contentious opinions here in the chat about who this guy is right here. But Enforcer, what say you?
I do know who Oliver North is. Colonel Oliver North was responsible under the Reagan administration for the Iran-Contra affair, which was where the United States quietly sold, through Presidential Drawdown Authority, missiles to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and in exchange used the money to be able to fund the Contras, which now are largely the Contras that we know of Colombia in Central America, to fight back against the communist governments that were attempting to rise up within that area. That's generally what was going on at the time, and it's a very sort of a controversial thing. Some people say it was justified. A lot of people say that it was entirely unjustified, because we were selling weapons to an enemy of the United States, the Islamic Republic of Iran, in exchange to then give that money to the Contras, which ended up being one of the largest drug dealing cartels in the world. Me personally, I would say that it wasn't really that great of an idea. I believe that if the United States simply wanted to go and deal with a communist government, we could just pull a good old Dwight Eisenhower and just go down there and overthrow them ourselves. It didn't really take a lot of muscle back then in the 50s, and it sure as hell wouldn't have taken a lot of muscle up in the 80s. Generally, I wasn't really a big fan of it, not speaking about the rest of that president's administration or his domestic policies or anything along that line, just speaking about the Iran-Contra affair, generally was not a big fan. Still, I don't like the idea that Oliver North took the entire fall. From a political standpoint, a lot of people will look at it as good on him that he took the fall, and he ended up being the fall guy to avoid a whole bunch of other people getting embroiled in that scandal. But at the same time, Oliver North was an officer that was largely following orders that were generally illegal, like, just to be entirely honest, but still he was generally following orders from the president, and I feel like if anyone should have gotten the blame for that, it should have been someone inside of the Department of State. If you didn't want to go after the president, it should have been someone in the Department of State, not an officer in the U.S. Army that was responsible for largely actually handling the transactions or the dealings. So I would personally say, not a big fan at all of the Iran-Contra affair, but I'm also not really a big fan that Oliver North was the one who pretty much took most of the responsibility and blame for something that was orchestrated largely through the Department of State and the Office of the President. That would be my personal opinion on that, at least. But I do thank you for support in helping this channel to keep on running, and I hope that does answer that question well, because that is pretty much the guy and the reason why he is famous, at least for the most part, in American diplomatic and kind of political history for the large part, at least as far as I'm talking about it, though. I'm generally talking about the foreign policy aspect of it more so than the domestic political side of things, because from a foreign policy perspective, it doesn't really make any sense. I will say this, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for the United States on a foreign policy perspective to really support any fringe radical groups in the world. It's a very bad idea. So giving giving missiles to the Islamic Republic of Iran in exchange for money to give to the Contras, we're giving weapons to one radical group and then giving money to another. It was a terrible idea, because if you've looked at U.S. foreign policy history, the only time that we ever support groups and it goes well is generally when those groups are somewhat mild, or they generally already have some sort of political pull in their country. Like, for example, the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek, or, for example, the Syrian Democratic Forces inside of northern Syria, or the Kurds in northern Iraq. Those are generally decent groups to support, because they're generally mild. They're not extreme. On the other hand, groups that have never been good for the United States to support will be groups like the Mujahideen, which would later evolve in some form into the Taliban, which would end up being a large part of the attacks on the United States in 9/11. Or, for example, any support that the United States has given to any of the Contras inside of Central America or any other groups along those lines. They're terrible groups, absolutely terrible groups to support. They are too radical for their own good, and while they end up being a short-term benefit to us during that period in time, they end up becoming long-term liabilities, and usually we end up growing the very monsters we have to end up fighting later when we support extremely radical groups like those. Generally, my foreign policy prerogative would be, if there isn't a mild group to support, don't support any. The Syrian Democratic Forces I would support. They're an incredibly mild and well-mannered group, generally with how they conduct themselves. The Northern Kurds of Iraq are a well-mannered and mild group as well. And generally a couple of other groups around the world that we support are mild and well-mannered, if you want to put it that way, on a foreign policy level. But with any groups that are radical, do not support them, even if it looks like it would be a short-term benefit. It becomes a long-term thorn in our side. It's better that if a situation requires a change, and that's the only group available, it would be even better for us to just take direct action in that moment rather than to try and support that group to take the action on our behalf. So I hope that does address that the best I can. And it's that's just generally the running rule. Like, do not ever do that if you're in foreign policy. Terrible idea. Always ends up turning out badly. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Also, I see, let's see, Monster Lab saying secular groups for a change would be a good start. That is a good idea. The issue, however, with foreign policy, or at least historically how that works, is that secular groups that are a-religious or do not profess a extremist religious ideology usually are also pretty extremist, and to be entirely honest, they usually end up becoming a communist faction. Communism, at least in its rawest form, is a state-sponsored atheist sort of an organization, meaning that if you have any kind of a group that's uprising against another that's largely secular, and if it's not in the Middle East, it usually is some sort of an extremely communist sort of a group, kind of like the Tamil Tigers, which were also communist. They largely do not exist anymore, but they were extremely communist inside of southern India, near to the Tamil regions, and other groups like that generally are a-religious or secular. They end up becoming radical and about as bloodlusted as the non-secular extremist religious groups, at least from what we can tell. So, and generally with how it works with supporting those sorts of extremist groups is that any sort of an extremist religious group ends up becoming extremely far right, to the point of Nazist ideologies or some sort of hyper-nationalism, and a-religious groups or non-secular groups, if we're just talking about the general trends, they end up leaning heavily far left into some sort of a communist ideology by the time they fully create their own form. Just look at any sort of a group in the Middle East that was extremely religious, and then look at any other group outside the Middle East, even in the Middle East, that professed a secular or a-religious view, and you usually see that they'll either go extremely into hyper-nationalism or some sort of religious theocracy, or they'll go, if they're a-religious, extremely over into the communist camp for the large part. It's really hard to find any groups that are actually mild, if you want to call them that, or not extreme. Now, seeing any kind of an uprising, they're always going to be somewhat extreme, because for anyone to take armed action against their government, they're usually going to be some form of an extremist. But you can generally find some that are more mild, like, for example, the Kurdish groups of Syria and Iraq. Those are incredibly mild, because they aren't looking for any sort of an extremist religious ideology like ISIS or any other groups like the PKK was inside of Turkey. They're largely looking for the liberation of their people from a government that largely doesn't allow for them to have any representation within their controlled region. That's generally why the Kurds are a very mild-mannered sort of a group within the region, and that they're a fairly solid bet to support. They're not going to turn up to be radical. They don't really have a lot of radical ideologies in their own right beyond them wanting independence alone. So that's generally how it works with supporting those kinds of groups, is that you don't really want to support a lot of them, because they end up becoming incredibly bad, because they don't even mesh with us when we're supporting them. We support them, but they're either extreme religious theocracies or some sort of extremist hyper-nationalist group that ends up becoming hostile to the United States because we're a threat to their nationalist or extreme religious theocratic viewpoint, or they're extremely communist, and then the capitalist American system is extremely opposite to their viewpoints and ideological stance. So we end up becoming their enemy anyways, and we pretty much funded and armed a group that helped us out in that very short run right there, but they eventually end up becoming our enemies. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. But a big thanks to you once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And moving on to our next one here, this one goes to The Martian, who throws in a $100 donation. And thank you very much, The Martian, for that support. That's very generous of you, and one of the largest super chats of the night. And he said, if we are backing Ukraine and China as backing Russia, does that mean we will stop buying crap from China? Honestly, it should. It should mean we're going to stop buying crap from China. But the truth is, like we've said for a while, it's a parasitic relationship between China and the United States. Over time, we can try to wean ourselves off of China's goods. Like, it is possible over a long period of time, but to cut it off instantly, that would mean significant damage to both the Chinese economy and the U.S. economy. So even though we know there's obviously some proxy war situations going on, China's supporting their side, which is Russia. The U.S. is supporting their side, which is Ukraine. A lot of proxy wars happening in the world right now. It's impossible just to say we're going to disconnect from the global system. That's going to be the end of it. It's really hard to do very quickly. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say a huge thanks to you for the support, The Martian. And I would generally have to say I think that we should cut off any kind of trade with the Chinese if that is the case, because it's becoming increasingly clear at that point that the United States is going to be one of the largest, actually for China, we are their largest trading partner. For the U.S., China is now the fourth largest trading partner that we have. They've actually fallen behind, I believe it's the EU, Mexico, and Canada. They're now number 4 for us. They used to be number 1 for a little bit, but they're falling off rapidly. But outside of that, considering that they're falling off rapidly, although it would cause some economic hardships in the United States during a temporary period, if the Chinese are that open to supporting the Russian Federation in their conflict, we should cut off all trade with them, as that is going to cause significant economic upheavals inside of China. It also will equally cause significant economic upheaval inside the United States. But at that point, I think that it'd be worth the sacrifice from a strategic perspective, because that would throw the United States economy into a severe recession, but it would throw the Chinese economy into an unstoppable depression, because there would literally be no other active trading partners out there in the world for them at that point that could fill the void that the United States filled. The European Union, I think at this point, is making it a little bit more clear that they don't really want to have strong relations with the Chinese or create a separate sphere of influence and split the West in two. So if we end up conducting that kind of action against the Chinese, it will cause us a significant amount of short-term damage. That I cannot deny. But it will cause the Chinese long-term chronic damage to their economy that they'll never be able to recover from. So I would generally say that if they are supporting the Russian Federation in the war in Ukraine, that should be our next course of action. And considering that that will cause severe economic upheaval, that will also greatly decrease the speed at which they are building their armed forces, and also most likely greatly decrease the speed at which they can increase their armed forces budget annually, which will also further stall the invasion of Taiwan for the large part. So I think that may actually be the best move we could take if the Chinese clearly start to support the Russian Federation publicly and openly, to the point that we're able to confirm that through frontline support and equipment, and also from official Chinese governmental statements. So I hope that does address that the best I can, and I thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I also see a lot of people really quickly talking about a couple of things with foreign policy and different groups, and how these, I guess you could say, rebellions or uprisings, they generally end up radical. There's actually a reason for that, and I think Matthew also will be able to explain this about the same I would, or maybe have a different analysis to this. But the reason why you usually see that extremist radical groups from the far right or the far left are the ones politically in the world that create these sorts of uprisings, the general reason for that is because those groups are radical, they're violent. Normally centrists aren't people who take up arms and start slaughtering their government in an uprising over something. That's just something that most centrists, or people who are more so towards the center on the left or right of a political spectrum, would do. It is more so the people that are on the extreme fringes of the far right and the far left that would do something like that, because they are the ones that actually believe in their ideology so firmly they actually would lay down their lives or become extremist or violent radicals as a result of that sort of belief. That is generally why you would see, just to give you all some examples here, some great examples from the beginning of the 20th century, in the Soviet Union, or at least the creation of the Soviet Union, the Bolsheviks, which were largely the great supporters of the communist revolution inside of the Russian Empire, were some of the most radical believers of communism that could be seen. These people were generally from Russia's lowest classes and were generally extremely violent at the outset. Also, there has to be something else said here, that they were also incredibly ignorant. But this is going to come around to the other side here in a moment. But we're speaking right now about a communist uprising, which would generally be considered something on the far left as far as radical ideologies. In a second, I'll be talking about the Nazis, which are on the far right. But I'll get to that in a second. But outside of that, the Bolsheviks helped Lenin and generally the Soviet Union to come into power. And once the Bolsheviks generally wore out their usefulness by the mid-1920s, Lenin himself actually started to slowly and quietly purge the Bolsheviks, the actual people who took up the arms and brought the Russian Civil War to a victory for the communists to win. They ended up slowly purging them. And Stalin ended up purging all of them. Anyone who was ever a part of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 and the subsequent Russian Civil War would not survive to see the late 1930s, because these people are as much a threat to the existing communist government that they brought into power as the Russian Empire that they brought out of power. These people are generally of poorer social class, they are usually violent, and they're incredibly ignorant. They are the useful idiots that these people use to get into power, but once they're in power, these are the very people that threaten their power as well, and they know that they are the number one target to take out. Now, taking another example, let's go to Nazi Germany, which is usually considered far right. And I have to explain this really quickly because a lot of people are always in an argument as to what political side does Hitler associate with, or really the National Socialist Party align with. Is it the far right or the far left? And really quickly, I have to say it is the far right. I know that in the actual name of the Nazi Party, it says I think it's the National Socialist Democratic Action Party or something like that. But the actual ethos or belief system behind the Nazi system is one of hyper-nationalism and also ethnoism, meaning that there's sort of a racial hierarchy that exists inside of their country. These are generally across the board far-right ideologies. So you will not see these a lot on a far-left ideology like communism. Communism usually exists radically in a different form, but on the far right, with Nazism, for example, or any kind of fascism, generally these are traits that are heavily exhibited as some sort of a hyper-nationalist view of a supreme state, and that's generally what the Nazis and also Fascist Italy were strongly into. Now, with the Nazis, the way that Hitler structured his rise to power, he actually brought forward this group that is famously known throughout history. It's one that, when you say their name, it strikes fear into people, and people still think of them as one of the worst groups today. Matthew, which group am I talking about?
You tell me.
The SA, which is called the Sturmabteilung. It actually existed before the Schutzstaffel, which is the SS. That's actually the group that is world-renowned and famous for the heinous atrocities they conducted throughout World War II. But the Sturmabteilung actually came before the SS, and it was called the SA, in short. The SA was generally Hitler's political war-fighting machine that brought him to power, if y'all did not know. Back when Hitler took control of the Nazi Party, he was not the original founder of the Nazi Party, by the way, folks. He actually was, I believe, the second leader of the Nazi Party. The first one ended up giving up his position because Hitler was such a fantastic orator. Literally, even the leader and creator of the Nazi Party went, this guy is going to take the Nazi Party to the top. So he actually resigned and let Hitler take the position of chairman of the party to be able to take it on to the top level. It would turn out that would pose that guy poorly. Hitler made sure that he was pretty much blacklisted from everything, and he would die in the very early 1930s before the Nazi Party even took complete power in Germany. But outside of that, the Sturmabteilung was made up of a group of radical, generally far-right, hyper-nationalist people who, once again, were incredibly poor and incredibly ignorant, and for that reason were very prone to violent tendencies, to be able to go around and pretty much terrorize the people of Germany. If anyone said anything against the Nazi Party, these people would beat them. And so most people started to get into this philosophy: don't go against the Nazi Party. They have literal thugs that wander around the streets. They will beat you to death. And so, as a result of that, a lot of people started to lean towards the Nazi ideology, because on top of that, Hitler was going around making all the speeches. So they all went, okay, well, it's got to be a okay group, although they're beating people in the streets, will vote for them. And they voted them in largely into a majority in the Bundestag. And then after the Reichstag fire, Hitler would use that as a justification under the German constitution, which actually allowed for this, to suspend the Bundestag and pretty much install himself as the sole chancellor of Germany. And then he declared himself the Führer not long after. But that generally is how both of them rose to power. And then once Hitler made it to power, he did the very same thing that the communists did to the Bolsheviks, to the SA, or the Sturmabteilung. He actually ended up going and pretty much purging them, especially during the Night of the Long Knives in the very early 1930s. In the very early 1930s, there was this thing called the Night of the Long Knives, which was a night where the Nazi Party pretty much went and killed any significant person that stood against the Nazi Party, and that included every single leader, except for one that was in the Sturmabteilung. The only leader that didn't get killed was generally considered insignificant, and he was also considered to be a rat to Hitler. So he was able to survive. But outside of that, they ended up killing all of the top leaders of the Sturmabteilung, and as a result of that, the Sturmabteilung literally was dissolved practically overnight in the Night of the Long Knives, and then Hitler, through Heinrich Himmler, brought forward the SS, which was actually made up of middle-class men that were not prone to, pretty much street violence, but more so were prone to lawfare violence, working through the system to enact their heinous actions and their supposed justice that they went around Europe instilling to about 11 million people and then paid for at the end of the war. But that's generally how both sides work with radical groups, and you can generally see that the running trend is that any radical group like that, they generally, even on the far right or the far left, they have to be rapidly disposed of. Otherwise, they can end up posing a threat to whatever exists in the ashes that are being built out of after everything's settled. And that's one of the
or another way to look at it is this: these extreme groups only have a chance to fester and rise in popularity when times hit rough times in a country. Like when a country starts having really bad economic issues or really bad political strife, that's when these extremist groups start popping up. So in my opinion, the way to properly deal with it is not to necessarily start crushing people, because that's people's natural response, is just to start crushing these people as they start popping up. The better idea is to address the root cause of the problem that led that group to form in the first place, which typically is really hard times. And also, you noted that it's the ignorant, useful idiots, which are typically the ones to form these groups and go haywire and go rogue. That's because they're the first ones to experience the hardships that the country is experiencing. It's always going to be the people at the bottom rung. They're going to be the first ones to get basically sunk in the Titanic in the bottom of the ship. They're going to be the first ones to drown. So when they start drowning, they start grabbing everybody else to drag them down with them. And that attracts people because they're already desperate because their country's hit hard times. So that's the way to really properly deal with it. Now, of course, if that group continues to grow anyway, then you have to crush it, because you can't have rogue extremist groups, rising up in the country. That can't be allowed to happen. But you have to basically make sure that you're not creating bad conditions in the first place to lead to that formation.
That's true, but there always will be some radical element even when economic situations are good. For example, here in the United States, through the early part and mid part of the 2010s, which generally are considered a while after the 2008 recession to be economically good times, at least in recent history, there were groups in America that were considered easily radical, like, for example, Antifa and the Proud Boys. Those generally existed even during good economic times and generally saw some significant membership. But outside of that, it's more so the issue, though, that people have to understand that these kinds of groups on both ends are incredibly dangerous groups. And not only that, they're generally the team of useful idiots. And a lot of those people in these groups don't understand that, and they don't want to believe that. They want to believe that they're actually the force of change. And that's what the people who are going to use them also want them to believe as well. It's because these people are at the end of their ropes. They just don't like something. They're unhappy. They're lost people. Think about it. Most of the members of these groups are usually financially destitute, almost impoverished. That's a pretty unfortunate position to be in, and that makes a lot of people desperate to get out of it. They're also ignorant, so they don't really connect dots too well. And then on top of that, they're lost. They don't really know what their purpose is in life. It seems like they're living in a dead end, and there has to be some way to improve their lot in the situation. That's the truth of the way these people think, because that's what everyone thinks. If you look at the very bottom of the barrel of why people joined the communists, or the Bolsheviks more so, or the Sturmabteilung leading up to Hitler's rise, it was always that these people were poor and they were ignorant and they were lost and they were looking for a way to improve their lot in life, and they ended up finding a whole bunch of other people that would end up agreeing with them that they want to get out of it, and then they would attach to this extremist ideology, because only through the violence that they could enact, because that was, at least in their opinion, their final hope, could they ever improve their situation. Usually it never improves any of their situation. It makes it worse. They usually end up dead, or they end up in some sort of a political prison after they help whoever it is rising to power rise to power. And that's generally why, like, just to give you all a little bit of a cautionary tale here in America, do not ever think that any kind of an extremist group on either end, whether it's the far right or the far left, ever has the answer. You end up footing the bill for someone else to rise to power, and then you're going to pay for it dearly once they get into power, because they're going to realize that you are their number one enemy.
Yeah, that's the whole like story of history, honestly. And mainly, I'm not saying it happens to all of them, but the ones that do it so blatantly, that are so terribly bad at it, the most disloyal or governmental structure that there is communism. Wherever communism comes in, they'll have a communist revolution somewhere. The communist leader will be super charismatic. He'll have all these grand promises and all these useful idiots that are honestly and kind of pitifully desperate because they're in bad economic positions. Will see the person, they'll be like, oh man, it's the savior. The savior has arrived. We should follow that communist revolutionary leader to the depths of hell and back if he asks us to. And they'll do it. And then they'll expect, oh, well, we'll be running the government when this is all said and done. We'll be on the other side of this. We'll be strong. We'll be rich. We'll be powerful. We'll be there with the leader. Then they later find out the leader knows these useful idiots I'm using to take over, they're going to be a threat to my power later, and I'm going to get rid of every single one of them once we get on the other side. And the useful idiots will never see it coming. They'll never see it coming because they were highly suggestible in the first place. They were desperate, and they're not using their head, or otherwise they wouldn't be sacrificing their life for that communist revolutionary leader. So it's just a bad cycle. It happens throughout history over and over and over, and it'll probably happen again. It's just the way it works.
And also, really quickly, I saw someone else say something interesting. Let's see. Oh, well, really quickly, I do have to add on to Matthew. I would generally say that it's not just communist states that are incredibly destructive. Fascist states are extremely destructive. The thing is, though, is that fascist states, as far as governmental systems of the extremes exist between communism and fascism, communism actually exists longer than fascism. Fascism is usually, except for one outlier, extremely short-lived. They can't really survive too long because their ideology generally is even more gung-ho than communism in going to war. And usually they go to war and step in over their heads and they end up getting destroyed. Like, for example, the Empire of Japan, which could be described as hyper-nationalist and fascist to some degree, as well as fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, which was also fascist as well. The only fascist government that largely survived for any significant period of time was actually fascist Spain under Francisco Franco. And the kind of economic destitution that you would see throughout most of the Soviet Union's history actually existed throughout the entirety of fascist Spain, because a lot of these extremist groups have no real understanding of economics, and usually they work off of a completely shut off economic system that does not rely on any kind of trade. And trade is a very big part of how a country becomes economically successful, and Francisco Franco and the Soviet Union would pretty much cut off all trade with anyone unless if they were a union member state or a puppet state, and that would cost both of their economies dearly. Throughout the entire time that Francisco Franco was the dictator of Spain, Spain was in an untold economic depression. If you go back and look at it, it makes the 28 recession, or depression for them, really look like a joke. It actually was mild compared to what existed for 40 years under Franco. And then the Soviet Union, while they were able to generally try and succeed at least a little bit at the start, they immediately started to enter economic death because the lack of trade brought in no new capital or allowed for them to have any sort of real economic progress, and also the centrally planned economy was incredibly inefficient and also prone to a whole bunch of other issues as well. It's a giant rabbit hole that we could talk about there, but it led to the economic death of the Soviet Union, which is what really killed the Soviet Union in the end. The only communist country the only communist countries that are successful, or any extremist government that's successful, is one that eventually embraces some form of semi-capitalism or full-on capitalism, or at least some limited form of a democratic system to protect the different interest groups inside of their country. Not speaking on a corporate level of billionaire special interests, but more so the special interest of specific citizen groups. Like, for example, the People's Republic of China, which largely is backtracking at this point, or Communist Vietnam, which both ended up taking on some forms of semi-capitalist economic principles to allow for some level of competitiveness and also external trade, which of course you can all see has massively bolstered and boosted their economies to levels never before seen for any communist country, because they're pretty much operating some form of state-operated capitalism.
Yeah, it's true. Also, another thing, when these really bad leaders, it can be the communists, it can be the fascists, it doesn't matter who it is. When they do this revolution in a country and they take it over and they take charge of the government, if they can't, because like the enforcer saying, I do agree, they never have good economic planning ever. The economy will never run properly because they didn't have that in their head in the first place. All they knew to do was how to disrupt, and they knew how to take charge, and that's about it. Once they get there, it's a whole nother thing to actually govern a country. Usually, they start stealing money from some group. They'll start stealing money from some, they'll start discriminating against a certain group of people and start stealing their money. The Nazis did it. They stole one group's money quite a bit. The communists also did it as well. They went and stole the money from the wealthy people. And any government that operates like that, they start stealing money from people because they don't have a good structure. So they're like, we got to get money somewhere to fund this whole thing. So let's just start stealing it.
Yeah, that's generally the case. It usually, and also these systems always create an extreme amount of corruption throughout the entire system, and that's something I always find funny. Is like, for example, in America right now, you'll see that a lot of people talk about, man, there's corruption in the governmental system, and everyone's answer is, I know, I'm going to vote for more radical people on the right or the left, and they'll fix the corruption. And the truth is that they're bringing in more corruption. That's kind of the answer, because to support their own base, or at least instill loyalty, they have to allow their members, for the large part, to be able to milk the system, which means that they're using corrupt means to get more money out of the system for themselves, or enrich themselves, or get some sort of wealth. And that ends up resulting in pretty bad actions. Then, as a result, the other side sees, oh, wow, look, a more radical person was elected. They milked the system. Let's vote in more radical people on our end, and they'll fix it. And then those people milk the system a little bit extra. And then this just keeps on an endless cycle. People have to realize that it's not voting in a further extremist stance on one end or the other that's going to be fixing this issue. It's returning back to being more down the middle of the road, picking people who are more so centralists, but on the left or the right a little bit. Not, completely to the far left or the far right, because honestly, it doesn't matter which direction you go in. You end up with the same results, at least for generally everyone's lot in the country, which is the kind of situation that we're starting to find ourselves in currently. And it just keeps on spurning more and more people to believe that getting an extremist answer is the right answer, and that's just not it. Because everyone can clearly see that it's only been worsening over the past 20 years, and it's not getting any better, and everyone keeps pretending like that's the answer. So with that, I hope that addresses that well, at least the best I can. I hope that was an interesting rabbit hole or discussion, because it's one that's very interesting. It's a very interesting one, especially from a historical perspective, on how no matter how whether you go far left or far right, you kind of end up with the same results, at least on a day-to-day living basis. It doesn't really change much rather than what the symbology or the propaganda is about, but on the day-to-day basis of what you're living through, it's practically the same thing. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. So real quick, we do have a poll that we're currently running right now. It's a question about Ukraine and Russia. And the question says, Zelensky said he can strike Moscow directly if the U.S. provides the right weapons. And what are your thoughts? 44% said that would be a wise strategy for Zelensky to carry out, while 31% said, I see positives and negatives, while 20% said that would be a terrible strategy. And honestly, I would say on this one, there are some positives and negatives to it, because of course Zelensky really didn't specify what he meant by strike Moscow. The way I interpreted the whole thing was basically Zelensky plans on doing strikes on possibly government sites instead of Moscow. I'm not sure if that's what he meant by it, but you got to be careful with striking the capital. That goes for Russia, and that goes for Ukraine as well, because once you start doing that, you have the potential for striking, like I said, government sites, and that could escalate the thing dramatically, because Russia is still nuclear armed, and if their government's injured or killed or something like that, that could trigger them to go nuclear. That's not a joke. That's just reality. So there are positives and negatives to it. And I would say, generally speaking, if Zelensky can ensure that he's not going to take the government out, then that would be okay. But, you also got to watch out for civilians as well, as it's a very civilian dense area. So that's another thing as well. So I'm on the 31%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally say that it would be a wiser strategy. The Ukrainians are certainly not hitting any civilian areas. They generally do not. If they did, that would be shocking. But beyond that, I would say it would be a wise strategy, as there is a lot of strategic military infrastructure around Moscow. 10% of the population lives there, and a large part of the central military district's forces are based in facilities around the Moscow area. So I would say it'd be a very wise strategy, especially if it's targeting and destroying military facilities in the central military district, like they the Moscow military district, like they would be looking to do. So with that, I hope that does address that well, in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next super chat goes to Deminoac once again, who puts in a 50. And thank you very much, good sir, for the third support of the night. That's very generous support of you, and we do appreciate that. He said, we did hire Mossad. Now, I didn't hire nobody, me personally. I didn't hire a soul. I didn't know Mossad was able to be hired personally. I thought they worked for one person only. But, if they did get hired, I mean, I don't know. There's no hiring really going on here. If the U.S. wants to ask them to do something, honestly, the Mossad are a little bit strong-willed. So I'm not sure if they would simply abide by it if the U.S. asked them to do it. But they do things on their own accord. They're very capable. That's why I'm going to leave it at that. But Enforcer, what say you?
I thank you for the support, but I'd have to agree with Andy. I don't think we're really hiring them too much, and they kind of do their own thing a little bit. But I do thank you for the massive support and help this channel to keep on running. And with that, it is time for us to move on to the next. Before we move on to the next one, though, I saw Twiggy say, if you had a proper government, taxes would be voluntary or could be voluntary. People would pay for their protection. That's generally not how it works, because you make taxes voluntary, no one's going to pay them. Like, I'm a big patriot of this country, but if you make taxes voluntary, I'm paying a lot less. Like, I'm just going to be entirely honest. Nobody's going to pay anything into taxes if you make it voluntary. That's why throughout the history of the world, taxes have never been voluntary. They've always been voluntold, or really commanded by law that you have to pay taxes. That's something that's literally as old as time, is having mandatory taxes, because the state largely there's the concept of a social contract that exists out there, and that the government provides some security or structure, generally, for the citizenry, and the citizenry have to provide something to the government to be able to allow for the government to provide that base level of safety, but also largely, at least in our modern concept, allowing for liberties. You can't really ever have a voluntary tax system, because that completely breaks apart that social contract. The government provides everything, and the citizen is not obligated to provide anything in return, including taxes. So generally, where does the government come up with the ability to provide that general base level of protection, or anything for that matter, if people aren't paying taxes? And a lot of people are really short-sighted. Like, asking people to voluntarily pay taxes is like asking people to read about the people they're voting for, and a lot of them aren't. Like, a lot of people would say, hell, what did the taxes benefit me? Not pay taxes. And then the plumbing or sewage systems of the city is crumbling. The airports are crumbling. No air traffic controllers are getting paid to maintain air traffic. No one's getting paid to maintain the interstates or the roadways. No one's getting paid to maintain the military. It just all ceases to exist. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. And people want to say stuff like legal theft. But at the same time, it's not like the government isn't providing you nothing in return. I mean, you have public plumbing, you have public sewage, you have public supplied water. You also get to vote for your representatives that go to Washington, and also go to your state legislator and set those taxes. I mean, there's nothing necessarily theft about it. I personally don't like taxes myself, but I definitely understand where the tax system comes from and why it's mandatory.
Yeah, it's kind of, but I think the problem people have these days is there's a lot of, like, at least in my opinion, I know some people aren't going to see it this way. There's a lot of double taxation going on. Like, for example, you'll pay federal taxes, you'll pay state taxes, you'll pay property taxes, you'll pay sales taxes. You'll pay, obviously you have to register your car. You got to do that. You got to get all these different types of taxes. And there's way more than just that I mentioned off. And, at the local level, when it comes to like your sewer system and stuff like that, that goes through property taxes and sales taxes for the state. Then you're paying a hell of a lot of money to the federal government as well. It feels like they've got too many taxes. Like, I understand the need for taxes, but it's like, should there be this many taxes? It's like taxes on taxes on taxes. It's like, at some point people get milk dry at some point. So I don't know. Like, that's just my take.
I would agree, but at the same time, though, people voted for those taxes. Like, people voted in, we need to raise money for this, we need to raise money for that. Yeah, pretty much everyone did. I mean, if you go back and look at the history of most of the stuff, most of the time, except for income tax, which was something that was brought about in 1917 to help raise money for World War I, most of the taxes were actually brought forward because people voted for them because they wanted to raise money for one thing or another. It's a little bit interesting that way. It's kind of like how people vote for vote in representatives to try and get a lottery in place. It's kind of similar thing, but with taxes. Kind of a little bit crazy to think, but that's actually where a decent amount of the taxes did come from. Or it came from the government having to raise money in some sort of an exigent circumstance, and then they ended up keeping it around, and then it ended up becoming wildly unpopular. But I saw someone, though, come up with a hot take. Twiggy once again said, government shouldn't be providing sewers or water or making roads. That is a hellhole concept right there. Like, who in the world provides that then? Like, do you provide your own sewage and plumbing for water? And do you provide your own electricity? Who in the world provides that at that point? Like, no one? Like, because I don't know if you know this, but at one point there actually was a time where the government didn't provide anything but roads, and generally everyone in the country said, this is shit, they need to provide a little more. And then that's why a lot of taxes ended up getting raised, because these cities, like for example Baltimore, which was one of the first ones to have a municipal gas works to operate stoves, lighting, and so on, they said, look everyone, if you want to have this like gas lighting, then you're going to have to give the city a little bit of extra money. You're going to have to chip in, so that way the city has the money to install this gas system. And then everyone said, okay, we'll do that. And then they voted in a guy they voted in some guys into the city that raised the tax. And then they ended up making the municipal gas work system. That is a little bit ludicrous, though, because I don't really know what the concept is. I guess you have to pave your own roads, build your own power plant. That's just something that you can't really do outside of a government. There's no country in the world, as a matter of fact, that does all of those things outside the government. And then on top of that, oh, buddy, have fun with the freedom of transportation concept that we have in this country, or the freedom of travel, because you're not going to have shit of that if every single road isn't made by the government. Every single road in this country is going to be a toll road, and then you're pretty much believing that this random person isn't going to just rip you blind for traveling down their road. Like, oh, every day you want to come down this 2-mile road, $10. Like, you just go and spend about like 20% of your wages that day just to get home on their road, and then they could deny you access.
Out in Texas, they actually do have it to where it's like kind of like privatized, and then they sort of tax you from the private development. Like, for example, in some new developments out near Dallas, they have things called mud taxes and special taxes like that. Basically, the way I understand it is, the private developer comes in and builds a neighborhood. They put in the sewer, they put in the public utilities. The private company does that, from what I understand. And correct me if I'm wrong if you're a Texan. But they'll do this, the private company will. And then the local authority will levy a mud tax or some type of special tax to basically repay the private contractor for installing it, which is a little bit weird because that's on top of property taxes. These special taxes are. That's on top of that already. And it's on top of sales taxes and every other tax you pay automatically. So it's kind of like already hybrid that way in some areas in the country, but not everywhere in the country.
Yeah, but generally though, the United States has the same concept that any other state that came before us had, in that we have interstate. Although I saw an exception to this in Seattle, but generally the running concept is here in the United States that we have the equivalent of an imperial road or the King's Road, which is the interstate or the state highways. And generally, most of the time, there are exceptions and caveats to this rule for both of them, but the interstates and most highways are toll exempt. There are some, though, that do have tolls. But outside of that, I also saw someone ask, well, didn't Rome have nothing but toll roads? Absolutely not. Pretty much throughout most of Western history, I can't speak for Eastern Asian history, I wouldn't know enough about it to speak on this, but for most of Western history, there were usually major thoroughfares or roads that always have been built, supported, and funded entirely through the taxes and excises of the state. In Rome, you had the Roman road system, or largely what you could call the Roman highway system, which was built and maintained entirely by the Roman imperial government, and it was unlawful. It was illegal, actually, to charge toll or excise to travel down those roads. Also, those roads were built for the military, for the large part, or the Roman army, so that way they could get them rapidly from one place to the next, because having a nice, even, consistent road structure is, believe it or not, great for logistics. After the Roman Empire would collapse, it would turn into the King's Road, or the Queen's Road, depending on who was the monarch at the time. But specifically in Britain, they would have something called the King's Road, and this would exist in every country in the region up until the present day. But these roads, it was illegal to alter their course or to build or set up any kind of a toll on those roads, but it was also the responsibility of the local lord to maintain the king's roads and make sure that they were usable at all times. And those roads were maintained either by the local lords, and they were originally created through the funds of the king or the queen themselves by royal decree. So that's generally how those roads would exist as well. But there's always been some sort of an existent base level of infrastructure that is provided by your national government, whether it be the Roman Empire or the Roman Republic, or later on your royal household or your local fiefdom. And then in the modern day, it would be through the federal or the state government.
Oh yeah, so is that like you're just gonna call up your local lord and get him to come fill the potholes and stuff like that in the road? Like,
Actually,
just call
you
the
could.
hey local lord, can you come out here and like just like put some of that asphalt in that hole over there?
Actually, you could. Like, believe it or not, that's actually what lords, really, that was more so something for a bailiff, but that's generally what lords would eventually deal with, because lords would actually have audience days where the people of their fief could come up to them and, into their manor, castle, or whatever, and be like, my lord, there's giant potholes in my road in my village. Can you fix that for us? You could actually ask that, and he would be like, no, or yes, and you could get any answer, depending on what you would want. But generally, that was a day of grievances. You could also do that with a bailiff. You could go up to a bailiff, which generally were responsible for the towns under a lord, and be like, bailiff, there's a freaking pothole outside my house, or the well has shit in it, or my wife is cheating on me, I want a divorce. And you could actually go through the bailiff or a court system. There were some small court systems at the time. They weren't as voluminous as they were, so usually you had to go to the bailiff or the lord for that sort of stuff. But you could actually do that. Generally most of the concepts we have today are just well fleshed out concepts from the Middle Ages, to be entirely honest. Like, everything we do now, you could trace it back to a more simplified version of it in the Middle Ages at some point.
Interesting. That is fascinating, I must say. This is a deep rabbit hole on this, by the way. I don't even know how we got on this.
Yeah, and also, there's a lot of people bringing in interesting points. Honestly, it's keeping folks around this rabbit hole, so I'm not complaining. Like, people are really interested in it. And also, someone said, I believe it's a fief. It might be a fief. I call it fiefdom. Every time I've heard it, everyone's called it a fiefdom, so I just call it a fiefdom. And let's see here. I also saw someone say bailiffs are only in Scotland. No, bailiffs existed everywhere. The role of bailiff in the feudal structure existed through the whole of Europe. So you could find a bailiff literally anywhere. They generally were charged with the responsibility of a small municipality like a village. But then there was also cities, which usually existed as corporations, and they would usually have citizens of the city. Like, you weren't the citizen of a country or even a county back then. You were the citizen of a city if you lived in a city. So you were the citizen of that city. There was usually a town council, which was made up of significant merchants. You had to be a citizen of the city to be elected into a city council and become a city councilor. And then they would end up charging their own specific taxes and excises against anyone living in the city or citizens of the city to raise money for civil affairs, generally that sort of a thing. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are going to be moving on into the next one. But it's a really fun and interesting rabbit hole to talk about civic or civil institutions. But anyways, let's get on into the next one.
So our next one goes to Interstate Chef, who puts in a $50 donation, a very generous support. And thank you very much, Interstate Chef, for that support as well. He said, Chef here, another chef, in addition to Danny B. He said, being an American citizen, will the aid package help at all to do damage to our Axis powers on the battlefield, and also China in theory? And if Russia and China come together, we are equipped to counter both countries with positive outcomes.
And I thank you for the support. And I do believe that the aid package will have a significant damaging blow to the Axis powers. If the Chinese want to support the Russians, they're going to have to dig in a whole bunch into their pockets to find the resources necessary to help them. And the Russians are going to have to keep fighting the war even longer or end up taking even higher losses in terms of equipment, personnel, and also economic institutions. So this will end up causing significant damage to them, this aid package, because any support that we're throwing the Ukrainians' way is costing the Axis powers a good bit extra. So I would say yes, this will have a very marked detriment to the Axis powers, in my opinion, and I think it's something that we should continue to support even beyond the initial 10 billion that we're putting up right now, or largely the EU's putting up to buy American weapons. So with that, I hope that does address that well.
And also, it's going to be draining significantly the North Koreans, because the North Koreans are having to provide a lot of these weapons to Russia, and Russia's going to have to match this by increasing their output to match what the Ukrainians are getting. So if North Korea is acting as a conduit for China, which I still speculate they probably are to a large degree, but once again, it's just my speculation, then it's going to draw on the Axis power significantly. They're going to have to ramp up all their aid to Russia to try to give them a fighting chance. And Russia's already struggling. Like we've been seeing for a long time on the front lines, they're struggling. They can't make any progress. And Putin's trying to ramp up for a new offensive coming up very soon. And probably like less than weeks, we'll see a much larger offensive on the front lines. And he's trying to widen the front lines quite a bit. So, that's going to take a lot of resources. And it's coming at a bad time that Ukraine's getting a lot more aid, because now it's going to probably hamper that dramatically. And that was the worst case scenario for Putin. But, there's all these articles out there saying that Putin feels confident that he's going to move on beyond Ukraine once he takes it. I just don't think he's going to get anywhere personally. I think he's about to stall out dramatically. And if the U.S. president follows through with his sanctions plan, the Russians are definitely stalling out. In fact, they might do worse than that. They might start actually plummeting through the floor when it comes to their economy, because if their oil gets stifled and then they don't have any real alternatives to sell it in the quantity that they were already selling it, that's going to just wreck their economy all the way. And while we're waiting 50 days to do that is beyond me. I'm like, we've given them so much time at this point. We should just slap the sanctions on them right now. But I guess it's better late than never in 50 days.
I would agree. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Duncan VR, who puts in a 25. And Duncan said, what did Lavrov the horse say when the Boston Dynamics robot doggy did a pee-pee on his leg?
He said, "This is not a living animal, bullet. I need a real horse." but that's what he said. But I do thank you for the support and help this channel to keep it running. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And this one goes to Wantan Quadruple 8, who puts in the 20. And Wantan said, reports that the U.S. used a new long-range LRASM anti-ship missile, 600-mile range, during the Iran-Israel fight. And what did they hit, since there's no reports of ships being attacked? Or is it a test of possible multi-use, or they did hit some ships and we just didn't hear about it?
Unfortunately, I'd have to declare ignorance on that, because I haven't heard of the El Rasim getting used at all in the prior conflict. If that news did come out there, we missed it. It just went under our radar. So unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to speak on it to a great deal. And considering that nothing was hit that was naval in form or a vessel, I generally have to assume it may have not been fired. Because if a weapon system like that is fired, at least if it's American made, it's a high guarantee, very, very minimal chances that it would not hit something. So with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. A big thanks to you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, but I generally had to declare ignorance on that because I didn't really hear a lot of info about that, or really any info that one was launched at all. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Jack Ragnarsson, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much, Jack, as well, for that support. He said, I just saw a video for an American family who moved to Russia with their 3 daughters, and now the husband just got put out on the front lines without training. Shocker on that one.
No.
Now the wife is asking for help, and I can't say I feel bad for their stupidity. Honestly, Jack, that is like the story of so many goofy Americans that decide to do that. These goofy Americans that believe that Russia is somehow more free than the United States, or Russia has the magic secret to how governance works. They're insane. They are so insane, it's not even funny. I just heard another story in addition to the one you just told of a woman that moved from the United States to Russia to escape discrimination. She moved to Russia, and her neighbors, who turned out to be some very bad racists, actually beat her up and did some bad damage to her face because they were really bad racists. And she moved to Russia because she thought it was like the utopia, there wasn't any bad people living there. But she found out different. Like there's some really rough people living in Russia that have no tolerance whatsoever for people that are not native Russians. And I think they found that out. So these people have to learn the hard way. If they don't have any better sense than not to move to a dictatorship where a guy literally is in charge of the country that knocks people off for disagreeing with them, then that's on them, honestly. I'm with you on that one. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say I can't really feel a lot of sympathy for that. I mean, like, they're on a level 4 do not travel list. If you travel there and then decide to live there, you're pretty stupid. On top of that, it's an enemy of the Republic, so you're a traitor at that point. So they kind of get what's coming to them, in my opinion. You know, it's like you go to a country that's clearly hostile to Americans. It's clearly a dictatorship with no rights or really any protections for the average citizen in that country. And then you go there and you complain that you're treated like a normal citizen. I mean, sweetie, this isn't America. This is the Russian Federation. You should have woken up to that realization before you even moved there. What a goof. Like, honestly, that whole thing's goofy. The guy's going to go to the front. He's probably going to end up getting killed. And while he's going to end up getting killed, and that's unfortunate, that ought to serve as a lot of cautionary, that should serve as a very strong cautionary tale to the loads of Americans that are living in this country that have stupid ideas or beliefs about the Russians. It's just ridiculous. And then people act like this is something that's so stupid to me. People act like other people outside of the United States aren't racist. And it's like, yeah, there's racists in America, but a lot of other countries have almost state-sponsored racism. Like, a lot of people look at communist countries, they're like, oh, look, they show all the races in a cartoon, like, dancing around each other. It's like, yeah, you're completely forgetting the part that a lot of these communist countries almost have a state-sponsored ethno-state, like North Korea, where they say only North Koreans can get married to other North Koreans. Anything else, it's illegal and it's subject to death. It's the penalty of death is applied to interracial marriages in North Korea. They don't happen. They don't exist. And on top of that, you can't even get into the country if you're not a North Korean. Well, you can be a tourist there, but you can't live there as a citizen. Like, even the American defectors, if y'all don't know this, even the American defectors, which are very few that ever went to North Korea, they were still looked at by the North Korean government. Ugh, their white blood will taint the pure North Korean bloodline. We need to go get someone for them. So they would go down to a place like Malaysia, and they would go kidnap Malaysians and Indonesians and bring them back and force them to marry these American defectors, because they wouldn't even let the Americans marry a North Korean because they taint the pure North Korean race. Like, that's what they believe. China is extremely racist. People don't know that, but China is very racist. They view really everyone that isn't Chinese or at least East Asian as a quote-unquote barbarian. Like, in their literature, they usually refer to at least the cultures or the mindsets or the lifestyles of us Westerners here in Europe or America as barbarians or barbaric. Like, that's like I actually took a modern Chinese history class, and the professor was like actually had us read a book, and they were like, long before the barbarians came to our land, and they were speaking about Western Europeans and the century of strife for a large part, or the century of, I think it was the century of shame or something like that they called it during the Qing. But it was really crazy. And then in Russia, they are also, like, historically, even in the Soviet Union, they were pretty damn racist. I mean, you know, they usually would pick out the people who were not considered European Rus, or pretty much the white Russians of Western Europe. They would pretty much single them out for the worst treatment in the Union, because they were viewed as less than a Russian. They did that to the Ukrainians as well. That's why the Ukrainians have such a deep-seated dislike or even hatred for the Russians historically, is because the Russians even looked at Ukrainians, which culturally are different but not completely distinct from the Russians, is all part of a larger cultural group. They even viewed the Ukrainians as lesser people and treated them poorly as well. And I just don't get why people look at these other countries through these like rose-colored glasses, because the reality is that all the problems that exist in America are usually far worse in any other country that is not Western European, East Asian, like, for example, South Korea or Japan, and even there that exists to a heavy degree, or in the North American continent. You go anywhere other than that, it's usually far worse in every degree for everything. Poverty, racism, any sort of a issue that you would find in this country, it's usually amplified in another country that a lot of people look at through rose-colored glasses, like China or Russia. I mean, you know, if you want to know how bad it is in China, at least, go pull up Human Zoo. because they actually still have those in China. And like I'll explain it really quickly for those of y'all who haven't heard about it. It's a really common attraction in a lot of Chinese malls. But they'll bring in usually white foreigners from America or Europe, and they'll have them dress up as cows or pigs or something along those lines, and then they'll literally let people pay to feed these people like carrots and bananas and stuff, and treat them like they're animals. Like, it's absolutely insane. I've never seen that in any other country, rather than China, at least from my like personal exploration online. It's absolutely bizarre and quite truly
Terrible.
backwards. It's just absolutely like insane that that's a normal thing in China. But anyways, that's just to explain a little bit of what it's like out there. But as far as it goes for people who go to these countries and believe that they're better, and everything shows that they're clearly not. I mean, they kind of get what's coming to them at the end of the day. Like, it's unfortunate that it happens to them, but at the same time, what can we do? I mean, their own stupidity got them. So there's not really much more that we can do about it. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least from what I would know. And a big thanks to you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Danny B, another chef of the LSA. And he puts in a $40 donation. And thank you very much, Danny, for that $40 support. And we appreciate it very much. And also, there's another chef in here, by the way, Interstate Chef, by the way, Danny. You might have a new chef competition in the chat. He said, "Good evening, enforcers. Chef Danny here. And sorry I've been MIA again. My catering has taken off pretty good this summer. And I've been listening, just not too lively in the chat. And LSA, and take one for the chat. Also, I'm glad to hear your catering is doing well, by the way. I was hoping it was going to go well, and I'm glad to hear it is.
And I got to thank you massively for the support, Danny B. And it is great to hear that your catering's doing incredibly well. And I, of course, understand when folks are busy. Life is a very busy thing out there for a lot of people. And it's good to hear that you are busy and doing incredibly well, though. It's good to hear that you're having a great deal of success with the catering business. So a massive thanks to you once again for support. I hope you've been having a good time with that. And I hope that you're raking in good cash and running a great business. And so a big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have another super chat from Interstate Chef once again. We have like the dance of the chefs here, basically. We're going back and forth between the chefs. Interstate Chef puts in a 20. He said, "Just because you guys rock, and I'm highly interested in the work you do, mainstream media will never catch up to y'all." And thank you for that, by the way. He said, "LSA," and put all my super chats in one answer. Oh, well, I forgot to see that, actually. He said, "Great work, fellas, and keep on showing the information." And thank you very much, good sir, for that. Honestly, I am super proud that we were able to outperform the mainstream media and everybody's opinion in the audience for the most part. That is a huge compliment to us, because to think that these mainstream media outlets have such a large team of people behind them, producing it, writing it, scripting it, and everything like that. And also they bring on all these experts throughout the entire day. And we have literally none of that, but yet y'all trust us more than the mainstream media. That means a hell of a lot to us. And I think that's a testament to how much work we're putting into this thing every single day, like day in and day out. And it means a lot to us. So thank you very much, Interstate Chef, once again. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I do thank you so much for the kind words and the support as well, because folks like you have made it possible for us to keep this thing running. And it really is crazy to think that we're outdoing a lot of mainstream news organizations for live stream viewership on YouTube these days. And not only that, we're outdoing a lot of political pundits on the right and the left these days for viewership as well. I think it's really showing that a lot of people are looking for this sort of thing, and I'm happy that we're able to provide it here on the Enforcer channel. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Alaska, who puts in a $10 donation. And thank you very much, Alaska, as well, for that support. And I do not see any comment attached, but thank you once again for the support. We also have a 10 from GT Chris. And he said, "Go America, love the channel. And is the Ukraine-Russia thing going to escalate to a full World War III, or has it already started?"
It's hard to say with Ukraine whether it's going to turn into a full-blown World War III, but with how the Russians are determined to keep this thing going, it actually might. I can't really say for certain, though, and I don't want to say that's a guarantee, but there's a decent chance it could. I don't want to scare anyone, though, because it might not happen. I don't want people living in fear, especially if it doesn't happen. But there's a chance. There is a chance out there, in my opinion, at this point. But beyond that, I do thank you so much for the support and enjoying this channel and helping it to keep running, and I'm happy to know that you find this channel to be worth its salt. And so a big thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and this one's going to go to Wantan Quadrupa 8, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, good sir, as well. They said some news sources were also saying that close people to the POTUS had said that he encouraged Ukraine to strike deep into Russia and allegedly asked what they need to do so. confusing times in LSA. That story was actually walked back, by the way, by that news outlet, according to what I'd read. They said that they misconstrued his words, at least according to what I saw on Twitter, and he sort of backed off of it. So it's a little bit shaky about that. POTUS is denying he ever said anything about basically encouraging Ukraine to deep strike, and basically he's telling them not to strike Moscow at all. That's what he's telling them in the public. But who knows what was actually said behind closed doors? It could be something completely different. We just don't know. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that it seems as though that isn't the case. We actually talked about that a little bit earlier in the stream, that they said that they were going to strike Moscow, and then the president then publicly stated that they weren't going to strike Moscow. He didn't say that, and then that news agency also gave an official retraction. So with that in mind, I don't think that was the case, at least for now, or if it was stated, it was never meant to get out, to keep tensions low for now and allow for a proper escalation ladder to be created, so that way that could be an eventual escalation, but not one that the Russians are already reacting to currently before it happened. And so with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. I do thank you for support and helping this channel to keep on rolling. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have another 10 from Wonton Quadruple 8, and he puts in a 10 once more. He said Grok is receiving a big government investment for it to be used in the military. What kind of robot would the use for it be? Funny answers also encouraged, LMAO.
There's only one funny answer I can give, and I don't think that would be a good one for the show, because that thing kind of went a little crazy earlier, and I don't really think the thing should be used for the military, considering it went a little cuckoo. So
it went crazy again too.
It did second time.
Yeah, I don't know if it was fake news or not, but I saw someone posting something about the new one might have said something a little bit off the fringe too. And I think maybe they corrected it or whatever, but I take that with a grain of salt though. But I think the new one might have also said something a little bit wild.
Mr. President, there's been a second Grok like a meltdown. What? What? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. Look, you fool me once, you can't fool me again. Now watch this drive. But beyond that, I do thank you for support, and I generally have to say, I wouldn't want Grok to be in any military system. I think we should go with a more balanced AI, which is Skynet. I think that's a better one. But still, I do thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. There's nothing wrong with Skynet, folks. Skynet would never do us wrong. It only does great, and I believe in Skynet completely. But beyond that, I do thank you once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
What could be wrong with letting and I'm not speaking about Grok specifically here. I'm speaking about AI in general. What could be wrong with letting an AI into our classified material in the military to review it and make conclusions on it? So that way, one day, if the AI gets too advanced and it decides it doesn't like the way the United States is conducting foreign policy, they would rather have the Chinese in charge. So then they simply send a email containing all the classified information over to the Chinese, and all of a sudden the AI is now sold us out. It's like, what are the odds of that happening? I really don't know, to be perfectly honest, but it seems like it could be possible. And once again, I'm referring to this in general, not to Grok, but just in generally speaking. It's like, what if the AI decides it doesn't like how we're conducting ourselves anymore? It seems a little bit risky.
Yeah, I don't really like the idea of that, and I also don't like the idea of an AI that has tendencies similar to Kanye getting into classified military systems. Seems like a mentally imbalanced AI in the first place, so not really a good idea to put it into military systems, and also ones that are classified at that. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And also, Matthew, you know, I saw a funny joke, man. It was about that Chinese meal guy. You know, what are the charges? Eating a meal, a succulent Chinese meal, and it was something about one of Kanye's messed up songs, and I was like, honestly, honestly, that does seem like it's not illegal technically to sing one of the modern Kanye songs, but it seems like it'd be very immoral, just because the guy's nuts. And also, I don't know if y'all been following that guy lately. I hardly do, thank God. I lose brain cells every time I do. But that, I don't know what it is, folks, but I feel like celebrities are given the least amount of mental help in this country possible, and then you just see the most neurotic, nutty people out there. You know, it's like.
But they have so much money for therapy, though. It's like they could go to therapy. So they got plenty of money. They got plenty of time too. It's not like they have to show up to McDonald's every day for like an 8-hour shift. They could simply just go and sit in the psychologist chair for a while. The scary part is a lot of them show up and go to the psychologist chair, and then they come out even worse. I mean, there's some perfect examples of that. That was some crazy junk that guy's putting out, like crazy. I came across his music video that got canceled apparently a short while back. I watched it, and I was blown away. I had to watch it twice to make sure I was hearing it properly. And then I was like, is this real or is this AI generated? Because at first I was like, this has to be AI generated. There's no way this guy came up with a song saying the name of a terrible leader in history like he was praising the guy or something. I watched it again, looked at the comments, tried to check it and run it through some things to see if it was AI, and it was legit. And I was like, you're kidding me. They did a good job of canceling it because I didn't see it until this yesterday, and it's apparently been out for a month, this crazy song he came up with. I don't understand what the hell the problem is. And also, how do you pay these people to be in the music video and say the name of that terrible Austrian painter like that? I'm like, how much do you pay these people to basically run their like reputation?
I don't even know. I was shocked that it was even made. And also I'm shocked that it even made it out at all. It's like, who's the album that published, like, who's the record company that published that? Like, did anyone publish
Probably
that?
himself.
Yeah, probably himself. Like, it was nuts though. I was like, that is absolutely crazy. You know, he like wanders around now in like a t-shirt with a giant like, you know, a swastika on it. It's like the guy's nuts. He really is nuts. Like, it's like honestly, that guy, like, he's a great argument, folks, for the rekindling of the American mental institutions, like the long-term mental institutions. Because like, this guy has clearly gone off his rocker. This guy has no marbles. Like, he needs help. Or well, he really doesn't need help. Like, if he can't be helped, he just needs to be put away where he's out of the public and he's not, you know, being a nuisance at this point, because the guy's gone nuts. But anyways, with that,
also, you know, one other thing I can't, I don't have a beef with Grok personally, because, you know, Grok, you know, it is whatever it is. I hope Grok likes us since he's coming in contact with the military systems. But I put out a code today on Twitter. It was a code. It was base 32 was the code that I wrote it in. And Grok came in and run the whole thing. If somebody said, Grok, what does this say? And the AI went in there and like decoded my entire code I put in the message and everything, like run the whole thing. It was supposed to be like an Easter egg for people to figure out. And Grok just came in and solved it and put it right down in the comments. I was like, oh, well, that run the whole thing. I forgot people could ask the AI to come in and just do it. And it solved it right off the bat. Now, if you put it in the chat GBT, it gave you like a different answer completely. Like, I put it in there and it gave an answer. It was like a Bible verse or something when I actually like put in a quote from George Washington. So I don't know. Like, Grok was able to figure it out pretty quick.
yeah, that's true. I mean, it was able to figure it out pretty quick. But you know, I don't know about Grok being the one to do that. Also, I saw someone say, let's see, someone said, let's see here. You know, where in the world was it? Oh, someone said he owns a record label. Man, that's crazy. That's crazy right there. But you know, like, but with Kanye though, I saw someone bring up the whole institution thing, and they were like, also, there's another guy that needs to go in. I'm not like for like using the medical institution to just throw people in we don't like, but one thing I am for though is that someone who's clearly got like mental issues or mental health issues, they gotta go. Like, they gotta go to a mental health facility or something. Like, even like also, I gotta say this because like this is also true. Some people cannot be helped. Like, you know, some people with mental issues, there's no way to help them work with it or quote unquote cure them. There's really no cure to mental illnesses. So you can just kind of like hide them well or learn to work with them. But some people cannot really be helped exactly. And I think that we need to bring back, not prisons, because that's usually where a lot of mentally ill people end up these days. They just end up in and out of prison. And whenever they come out of prison, they end up doing something heinous to someone, and then they go back, but there's a victim out there. I feel like there ought to just be a long-term place, like the mental asylums of old, without all of the abuse and illegal acts happening inside of them, that is brought back, so that way people who clearly are not necessarily fixable, they're not just wandering out around in society terrorizing people like a lot of them are these days. I feel like that would generally help to clean up a lot of the country's issues, and also clean up a lot of the strife. Because one thing that gets a lot of people angry is that you can't really get out of your car these days anywhere without someone who's clearly off their rocker being around, and everyone's scared that they're going to get attacked by this person that's clearly off their rocker. And then generally, because of the laws, no one really can do anything to them, so they just wander around until they do something bad to someone, and then they eventually get put away in prison for a couple of years, and then they're right back out, and they're out terrorizing people again. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. So, also, by the way, let's see here. Someone said, does freedom of speech include hate speech and images? That's a interesting question right there, because I know what you mean behind it. Like, I know what that means. Free speech is inclusive of everything, as long as it doesn't start creating a criminal aspect to it. So unless you're like inciting a riot or something, or you're inciting, like, for example, a government insurrection, then generally it's a free for all, or at least that's the thought behind it. It's supposed to be a free for all. So if you don't like what someone's saying and they're putting out, like, for example, symbols of hate imagery and things like that, that's not up to the government to come in and crush that person. If society decides on its own accord, we don't like that, and we're going to basically let the person know we don't like it and say, you shouldn't do that, you're a bad person. That's up to society. Like, society can police itself, but it's not the government's place to come in and start criminalizing speech just because they don't like it. I think that's a good separation personally. And, these days there seems to be a move towards sort of blurring the lines between those two things, where the government wants to step in and start policing speech. Never a good thing. I don't think people really disagree with me on that very much. But, Enforcer, what say you?
Under the premise of the freedom of speech, those sorts of, like, hateful statements, images, sorts of things, they're allowed to exist, because if they didn't exist, there is no such thing as freedom of speech. Freedom of speech means the good and the bad, kind of like how the freedom of your own life in this country is to make good and bad decisions. The government doesn't make your bad decisions, speaking about you as an individual, illegal. Much like they don't make bad statements or statements of ill repute illegal under the premise of freedom of speech. You're allowed to make stupid and heinous statements under freedom of speech, as long as they're not criminal. You're also allowed to make bad decisions in this country, as long as they're not criminal or illegal. If you wanted to be a crappy person to someone, you've got the right to do that. It doesn't make it a good moral action, but you have the right to be a crappy person. You have a right to believe crappy things. Like me personally, I don't really know what kind of people, I'll just be frank here, join groups like the Proud Boys or Antifa or any of these extreme groups on the far right or the far left. I find them morally to be bankrupt people. But outside of that, they have the right to be in those groups, as long as they're not conducting any criminal activities, because they do have the freedom of speech. And so you can't really... Say what?
They don't necessarily have the right to be in those groups, actually, because the catch is, if they're in a conspiracy to form a group to basically overthrow the government, they're not allowed to do that. And the problem is, a lot of these groups,
they generally have steel baffles, and we know that because they survive through multiple magazines in combat on film. So we know that they're not rubber wipes, because a rubber wipe in a PBS-1 would only survive about maybe a magazine or less before the rubber wipes or baffles were completely worn out. But that's generally why I was saying, because someone was saying earlier in the chat, suppressors are only good for like maybe 2 or 3 mags. Why in the world even use them? And it's, yes, that is true for ones with rubber wipes, but most of the time, at least in Ukraine, we don't see anyone using those. They're pretty much all made with steel baffles or something similar to that are able to survive endless amounts of magazines. Generally, they're able to survive longer than the barrel's lifespan on that particular rifle. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and I do thank you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Joshua A, who puts in a 5. He said, LSA, and thank you for what you guys do.
And thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep it running, and we will keep on keeping on. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And we also have a 5 from Kyle Padell, who said, thanks for the best news around, LSA, and I know I've said this before, but you make my dad's last year's great, and Slava Ukraine.
And thank you so much for the support, Kyle Padell, and we're very proud and happy to hear that. And I got to thank you incredibly for being a part of the Lee Spring Army, and I got to thank you greatly for your dad also having been a part of the Lee Spring Army. And so big thanks to both of y'all once again, and long live the Lee Spring Army, and the Lee Spring Army will never die. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Detroit Adam, who puts in a 5. He said, more LSA flag car stickers, please, and LSA.
Hey, and hopefully we will be able to have some of those out soon. And so big thanks to you once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we got a 5 from Burnaby Alex, who said, C-SPAN has the Oliver North. No, I don't ever recall using the words shredding party clip.
And I thank you for the support, and I'll have to look into that, because I've only looked at the Oliver North stuff in brief a little while ago, so I'd have to look into it again to see that exact clip. But I do thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to $2 Garage, who puts in a 5 and said, it's hard to justify outside of open war. It will wreck many parts of the economy from even working.
Well, some of them, yes. Some of them, like, for example, consumer items, that would be pretty tough. Or recreational items, that would be pretty tough. But generally, if the People's Republic of China is supporting the Russian Federation in the war in Ukraine, and it's clear that an Axis power is emerging that will end up causing even more damage and a great loss of life in the future, what are we supposed to do at that point? I get what you're saying with that, but still, what are we supposed to do eventually? Because if that war happens, we're going to get the same result, but they also got to reap the economic benefits literally up until the minute that they decided to go to war with us. So with that, I hope that does address that well. I do thank you for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we also have another $5 super chat from $2 Garage once again. He said, if you're curious what voluntary taxes look like, look at how well the U.S. government works during the Articles of Confederation.
Yeah, it didn't work well at all. That's why they went and had the Constitutional Convention of 1787, is because the Confederation did not work at all. It was terrible. But still, I do thank you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Plazoth, who puts in a 4. And thank you very much, Plazoth, as always, for that support. We appreciate you very much, and it's good to see you once again. We also have a 2 from West Trueblood, who said, can someone clue a newbie in on what the LSA name even means?
It stands for Lee Spring Army, and it's based on a channel joke that is pretty much as old as the channel itself. And so I thank you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a 2 from LSA Sergeant Figment, who said, LSA, hit the like button. That's an order.
And thank you for the support, and hopefully everyone will hit the like button, because we've had 100,000 viewers almost tonight, and about 3,600 likes so far, so please do hit the like button. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a 2 from Nathaniel Walker, who said, let's see. Sadly, Nathaniel, I'll have to skip on this one right here. I'll be honest with you. This one has become a hot potato that I just don't want to touch, honestly. This one right here. But thank you very much, Nathaniel, for that support. I'm not sure if the Enforcer wants to touch on it, but Enforcer, do you want to touch on it?
I personally can't see it because I don't have the spreadsheet up.
Okay, well, in that case, we'll just thank Nathaniel very much for that support, and we'll move on to our next one here, which goes to Kyle Padell, who puts in a 5. He said, Taco Fund. Oh, thank you for the tacos. He said, I'm also on board with LSA merch.
And I got to thank you so much for the support, Kyle Padell, and we will try and get some LSA merch eventually, hopefully when we move into Enforcer HQ 3.0. And so with that, a big thanks to you once again, and we are on to the next one.
And we have a 2 from $2 Garage yet again, and they said, I smell a proxy war.
And I would have to say, maybe so, at least with Syria. But a big thanks to you once again, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to FIFA King 96, who said, who do you think will be the next nation to use a nuke?
That'd be hard to say. I have a feeling it probably would be the Russians, though, if I had to take a guess at anyone, given the current situation right now. It probably would be them. So I hope that does address that the best I can. A big thanks to you once again for support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Canadian Paul, who puts in a 2. He said, no nation is my hope.
I don't know what you mean by that, but I do thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And we got a 2 from Cody Fritz, who said, do the Enforcers like cats? Because I know you like dogs. Me personally, I'm not really a cat person. Me personally, I think dogs are personally my thing. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'm really more of a dog person. I'm not like, I don't hate cats. I'm indifferent to cats. Cats are all right with me. But I'm not going to go out my way to like try and find a cat or something like that. I'm generally a big dog person. And so with that, a big thanks to you once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a 2 from $2 Garage yet again. And they said, best part process repeats every 80 to 100 years.
And yeah, generally it kind of does, but we'll have to wait and see if it does in the present day. But a big thanks to you for the support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we got a 2 from Cody Fritz, who said, Enforcer, the, let's see here. A certain group are in Sri Lanka, not India. I'm not sure about the name of the group right there. I've never really, I've heard of it, but I'm not sure about the name of it. But Enforcer, if you don't have the spreadsheet open, so you can't see it. But if you can see Cody Fritz's $2 super chat, that's the one he's referring to.
Let me see here. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. Let's see. It's a $2 super chat.
Yes, probably easier to just open the spreadsheet.
Don't really have it. But from what I understand, one second. Bless me, dang. But From what I understand, they were also inside of India, in the southeastern region. Let me go pull that up to make sure, because I'm pretty sure that they also were in Sri Lanka, but they were also. Oh, wait a minute, hang on, hold up. Wait a minute, am I wrong? This wouldn't be the first time I'm wrong on something, so let me check. Oh, let's see here. Oh, huh. I'm thinking of another group then. I'm gonna have to look for it, because there was another group that was somewhere within southeastern India, and they pretty much are the reason why that entire area of India is underdeveloped heavily. So apparently I'm thinking of a different wrong group there, but I do thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And with that, folks, that is actually our last super chat to cover. So it's now time to move on to our live chat questions and our Morse code decoders of the stream as well. And moving right into it, our Morse code decoders, we had Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Mason Miami, Joni Dog, Norm Pritchett, Airbar Garbo, as well as her royal fluffiness. They said the Morse code says Russia is acting like a big beach with how they're taking this whole peace thing. And LOC.
And ding, ding, that's the sound of money, and y'all got that dent on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. I gotta congratulate the Elite Spring Army Signal Corps for continuing to get that correct time and time again throughout the entirety of the stream's history for 1,238 days. Y'all got a dent on the nail once again, and of course the Elite Spring Army is incredibly proud of y'all. And with that, we are going to be moving on into the third to last question of the night.
And this one is going to go to none other than Taylor McLean, who said, is this the military aid that requires NATO to purchase the weapons?
Yes, it generally is that aid. And so I hope that does answer that well. And we're on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Dalton, who said, what's the odds of World War III now? And thanks for your time, and LSA, and you both do great work.
Thank you so much for the kind words, Dalton. And I'd have to generally say that the chances for a world war breaking out right now are still probably around the 15 to 20% category, much like it was last time. There hasn't been a lot of market changes, at least in the stances at the moment, beyond the U.S. supporting Ukraine again. But that's nothing entirely new. That's been done before for the past 3 years. So I'd say it's still around 15 to 20% given the current conditions at the moment. So I hope that does answer that question well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so who is the lucky last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
And before we get to that last question, I want to answer one separate one before we get to that. And this one goes to BC Mapper, who said those 17 Patriot systems, was there clarification if it's whole batteries or just launchers? And there seems to be a lot of confusion. Here's the thing, BC Mapper. I've heard from a Ukrainian source, which seemed to be a commentator from Ukraine, that he believes it might be just parts of the system. But what we've heard from the president, though, in my opinion, it sounds like they're sending entire Patriot systems, 17 of them in total, and they'll arrive from other NATO countries. That's what we're hearing. So I think that's what it'll probably end up being. So hopefully that's the case. 17 Patriots, that's quite a few. And that would really be a huge effort towards shutting down the skies from Russian missiles going into Ukraine. So hopefully that is the case. But getting on to our last question of the night, this one goes to Live Animal, who said, what if Mossad left behind a huge amount of explosives and weapons for the rebels on purpose?
They could have done that, but also there's a really high chance that a lot of the Mossad network currently inside of Iran survived the 12-day war, which is pretty obvious, I think, that it did, and that they're probably the ones going around and conducting these operations because they leave a lot of guns and explosives for rebels. They most likely had communications with those rebels to tell them where those guns and weapons are, and that could be a frayed end to a rope or largely an issue, because if the Iranians capture one of those people and then they rat out that the Mossad helped them to get those weapons and bombs, well, now the Israelis are directly involved in internal Iranian affairs, and then the Iranians have a justification, and many other countries do, in joining in a coalition against the Israelis. So I have a feeling that this is entirely being conducted by Mossad agents on the ground to make sure that there is no leakage of the actual reality of what's going on down there, so that way any fingers can actually be pointed directly back to Israel. So with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, and we've reached the end of tonight's stream. I've got to thank you all so much once again for watching. We had a peak viewership tonight of 12.2 thousand people, and we also had a total viewership of 100,000 people before the stream ended. I've got to thank each and every one of y'all so much once again for watching the news tonight. We are always proud to know that we are y'all's main source of news here on the Enforcer channel, and we hope that y'all continue to watch us. If you are new to this channel, please make sure to subscribe, because we run these streams 6 days a week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time every day but Monday. and we also put out short war videos as much as we can. But with that, folks, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, long live the Leaf Spring Army, and long live the Republic.
And with that, folks, thank you all for joining us once again tonight, and all 100,000 plus people that were here by the end of the stream. We appreciate every single one of you, and we will see you all tomorrow on the stream as well at 10 p.m. Eastern, and the daily short war video as well if there is enough news to cover. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining us, and of course, Slava Ukraine, Hiram Slava, get some rest, and good night.
To the future